distinguished delegates, esteemed speakers, honored guests, Namaste, Vanakkam, Salam. On behalf of the organizing committee, I, Nabila Siddiqui, Assistant Professor VMLS, cordially welcomes you all to the International Conference on Rivers 2024, here in the vibrant city of Chennai, Tamil Nadu. As we gather on the shores of the Bay of Bengal, we recognize the sacred rivers that nourish our planet. Rivers are the lifeblood of civilizations, quenching thirst, fostering agriculture, and supporting biodiversity. Tamil Nadu is a home to 39 majestic rivers, including Kaveri, Palar, etc. And we are extremely proud to host this global convergence. Our state's rich cultural heritage, rooted in the ancient Tamil civilization, forging meaningful connections through these global river communities. We'll share innovative solutions over the span of 2 days with best practice models, traditional wisdoms to protect, preserve, and regenerate our precious rivers. Over the next few days, we'll delve into critical themes like river conservation, restoration, water security, sustainable management, climate resilience, riverine ecosystem, biodiversity, and community engagement. As we navigate through the complexities of river management and river conservation, let's remember the timeless Tamil phrase, and I beg pardon if I pronounce it wrong, Nadigal Tamilagatin Uyir Nadigal, which means rivers are Tamil Nadu's lifelines. Together, let's forge a global river community that honors local perspectives, fosters collaboration, and inspires actionable change. Once again, I welcome you all to Chennai, Tamil Nadu, and the International Conference on Rivers 2024. I would now like to request our Dean, Professor Dr. Anant Padmanabhan, Dr. Tina Paloniti, Eklavya Prasad, Dr. Ramaswamy, Advocate Gopinathan Sir, and Dr. Sangamitra and Professor Abhinandita to kindly occupy the seats. Requesting the dignitaries to kindly rise for the national anthem. Sorry, Tamil Taiwar, yes.
நீராறும் கடலொடுத்த நிலமடந்து எழிலொழுகும் சீராறும் மதனமென திகழ்வனத கண்டமில் எக்கணமும் அதிசிறந்த திராவிடனல் திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு பிறை முதலும் தரித்தனரும் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே உன் சீரிழமை திறம்பியந்து செயல் மறந்து வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே
I would now like to invite our Dean, Dr. Anant Padmanabhan, to felicitate Dr. Tina Paloniti. Thank you. I would now like to invite Dr. Winfred Chalaya to felicitate Mr. Eklavya Prasad. Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite Dr. Formina to felicitate Dr. Ramaswamy, sir. Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite Professor Nishant Shiokan to felicitate Advocate Gopinathan, sir. Thank you. I would now like to invite Dr. Shenbagavalli ma'am to felicitate Dr. Satyamurthy, sir, Director, Research, VMRF. So you are the pillar of the strength for the event. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Now, let me take a moment to introduce you to the anchor of our strength and the visionary leader of Vinayaka Missions Law School, our Dean, Dr. Anant Padmanabhan. His valuable wisdom has served as a wellspring of inspiration for us all. He has reinforced the profound significance and dedication to achieving excellence. Requesting Dr. Anant to deliver and throw open the event by speaking a few words. Over to you, Dr. Anant.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Nabila. I'm not an expert on rivers, so I'm going to confine my views about something which I have, through experience, gained a little bit of understanding of, and that is the organization called Vinayaka Missions Law School. But before I get to that, on behalf of Vinayaka Missions Law School and the Vinayaka Missions Research Foundation, Deemed University, Salem, I welcome all our honorable dignitaries on and off the dais. Set up in the year 2021, Vinayaka Missions Law School has come a long way, I would say, having treaded a large part of that journey together with the institution and all my wonderful colleagues. And a large part of why we have is because of asking critical questions. I think society has constantly evolved on the back of great questions. Why did the apple fall from the tree? Why can't reusable rockets be made? Why can't you deliver things online? All of these questions have led us to a very different world that we continue to inhabit and nurture with our own questions and ideas. Now, as far as VMLS is concerned, the critical question from the time this institution was set up was to ask, how would the law school of the future look like? I think this is a very important question to engage with, simply because legal education in many ways have led to massive social transformations. And we are in that point in time where I believe there is just so much happening around us that makes us think and rethink about the kinds of futures that we are building. One fairly sordid view of that future is one where we have tremendous inequality between the haves and the have-nots, and we completely destroy our environment, and all forms of growth that we as human beings have come to enjoy would be largely unsustainable in nature. But thankfully, that's not where things end. In fact, that is a beginning point, if anything, for more inquiry and to think of an alternate future. One where we make the paradigm for development far more sustainable, where we believe that law, policy, and various other disciplines converge, like this wonderful conference today put together by my colleagues at the Center for Promotion of International Law, that multiple disciplines and multiple experts and minds converge to work out an alternate future. That really is part of what it means to build a law school of the future. Similarly, a lot of legal education in India, as we know, has succeeded in producing amazing quality talent at the top levels. The National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, my alma mater, which I am quite proud of, set in motion what we call the second generation of legal education, which then led to well-trained lawyers with amazing research skills who could service clients for a new kind of India. The India set in motion by the vision of P.V. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh in the early 90s. Similarly, the Jindal Global Law School set in motion a very different kind of legal education model, one that is more global in its outlook, exposing students to multiple global perspectives, and through that, strengthening young legal minds. I would call that a third generation initiative. But in all of these journeys that we have seen, the travails of legal education, the one thing that has kept coming up as a constant refrain from the bar and the bench is, where is this quality when it comes to lawyering at the lower courts? Where is it finally resulting in access to justice for the common person? They too have problems. In fact, they have far more problems than multinational corporations, for instance. But there is a lack of access to top quality lawyering at the lower courts. Similarly, English education, as we all know, has led to several beneficiaries in India. One of the reasons why the Indian services sector grew over China is because of English education. No doubt about that. I too am a beneficiary of English education. It opened up amazing institutional opportunities for me. But is it doing the same thing for everyone? Clearly the answer is no. There are many students who do not have the privilege to go to institutions where they are trained with the felicity of English language. But we need lawyers from these communities too. In fact, we need more such lawyers. So, can language be a leveler? Can language be an enabler rather than a barrier? So this was another major question that, in our view, has to define anything that the law school of the future does. The third, of course, is technology. Today we sit here talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all the wonderful things that technological potentialities are opening up for humankind. But again, the question remains as to what is this going to do to the workforce? What is it going to do to the very idea of humanity? Are all our interactions, be it with the state or with private corporations, going to be with machines? Is it all going to be automated? Where is the space for human emotion, collaboration, and all the other things that we call distinct human values? This, again, is a question that any law school of the future must necessarily engage with. So these questions have, in a way, led to this institution. And as the dean of this institution, as the custodian in some ways of these questions, I too have personally taken a very active interest in ensuring that constantly Vinayaka Mission's law school is engaged with finding the right kinds of answers to these questions. Of course, no one individual or institution can claim to be the repository to answers that are by definition so complex, because the questions themselves are significantly complex. It's just not possible. So the only way to do it is to build a collaborative institution. One that serves as a crucible, a platform for individuals, for experts to come in and provide them the space to engage with ideas, ideas that can really transform the world. And it is in that spirit that Vinayaka Missions Law School launched its 4 centers. The first is, of course, the Center for Promotion of International Law, which today is the host of this conference, guided ably by my wonderful colleagues, all of whom you are familiar with today because of the pre-conference preparations. The second is the Center for Justice Through Technology, again asking a very important question for the present and more importantly for the future. How does justice delivery look? Can technology be an enabler while ensuring that there is inclusivity, that it does not exclude people who do not have access to technology when it comes to justice delivery systems? The third is our Global Tamil Law Center. Here we are in the wonderful state of Tamil Nadu, which has contributed so much to the nation's and the globe's culture and heritage. An important classical language, Tamil has unfortunately been ignored in more ways than one. The interplay between Tamil and legal cultures has equally not received the type of attention that it should have. And the Global Tamil Law Center looks to address some of these deficits or gaps. And finally, of course, being in the city of Chennai, home to a wonderful port, Center for Maritime Law. We feel that today, maritime law, while an amazing source of work for lawyers, has seen very little growth of the bar. The work is all confined with very few lawyers. And we felt that the next generation of legal professionals who work on admiralty law, maritime law, can be incubated here with the efforts of the Center for Maritime Law. So these are our 4 centers, and the work has begun in full swing for each of these centers, and we've seen tremendous progress over the last 1.5 years. Finally, I would also like to mention my wonderful faculty colleagues who are driving all of this innovation and change, because without people here who are trained to think in these directions, committed to work towards the cause of students, towards the cause of ideas that can build the law school of the future, we would be nowhere in that journey. So I'm deeply grateful that today we have grown from a faculty size of about 8 when I took over to 28 faculty members who are working day and night to ensure that we build here the law school of the future. So on behalf of my colleagues, on behalf of this institution, on behalf of Vinayaka Missions Research Foundation, the umbrella under which we stand, an institution known for more than 4 decades of legacy in the field, particularly of health sciences, on behalf of all of us, today I invite you, I welcome you all to our campus, and I hope that the next 2 days see paper presentations and discussion, open discussion of ideas that can hopefully lead to more transformative change. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Anand. I would also like to take a moment to introduce quickly and welcome our guest off the dais, Justice Masroor, who's traveled all the way from Bangladesh. Dr. Deepak Gayawali, who's traveled all the way from Nepal and was the ex-minister at Nepal for water resources. Advocate Shawahik Siddiqui, sir, who's traveled all the way from Supreme Court of India. Advocate Gopinathan, sir, who takes up matter at Madras High Court and Supreme Court of India. Dr. Amrisha Pandey, who's traveled all the way from UK and works at BML Munjal. Dr. Mrinalini Banerjee, who's traveled all the way from NLU, Odisha, National Law University, Odisha. Thank you so much. I would now like to introduce our chief guest, in fact, my friend, Dr. Tina Paloniti, if I could say that. Dr. Tina Paloniti is an associate professor of environmental and sustainability law at the Faculty of Law, Vasa Unit, University of Helsinki, Finland. Dr. Paloniti has a passion for the intersection of science and law, specifically in regards to aquatic and terrestrial biodiversity. Dr. Paloniti is the chair of the board of IUCN Academy of Environmental Law, member of the Journal of Environmental Law Editorial Board, member of Finnish Nature Panel. Dr. Palanity is currently researching on carbon capture and utilization and value chains in EU environmental law in the Bio-CCU project Business Finland. Dr. Palanity teaches National Environmental Law at Faculty of Law's Vasa unit and also leads Sustainability Law Research Seminar together with Assistant Professor Kambu and supervises 6 doctoral researchers. I now request Dr. Tina to give the inaugural address. Over to you, Dr. Tina.
Thank you, Nabila. Thank you all. Dear Professor Eminence Ramasamy, dear Professor Prasad, dear Professor Siddiqui and Paranavan, dear esteemed audience, it is my utmost pleasure to be with you here today. I am old enough for this talk not to be my first keynote address, but young enough for this to be my first keynote talk outside of Europe, my home ground. Thus, I would like to thank you for the trust you have shown in inviting me to give the talk in this esteemed company on the most topical and urgent matters. We are here to discuss international law on rivers, or rivers in international law. I come from Helsinki, Finland, land that is proud of its traditions on international water law. That reaches our history, that I have always been shy to identify as water law scholar, let alone international water law scholar. Because after all, as said, my interest has always been rather on water management and law, rather than water law in terms of hydropower or such, and on the interface between science and law, rather than law in itself, and on the European Union law as it is implemented in its member states, rather than international law. I, however, address you today with hopes that my reflections stemming from this research background can be of help when examining the law and policy on rivers, ecology and diplomacy on rivers. In the EU, the regulators chose to issue a framework directive to regulate water management a quarter a century ago. After examining that instrument, the Water Framework Directive, for several years, I realized that the starting point started to feel a bit peculiar. How could one frame a waterway, waters in general? Because after all, waters are all about the hydrological circle, continuing perpetually, allowing water to change its physical form as it goes down from clouds, on soil, to rivers, to the sea, and up again. Rivers run through jurisdictions, paying little attention to humans attempting to regulate their flows. And unfortunately, rivers also carry our sins in form of pollution too, from one legal structure to another. All this make rivers a fascinating research topic for a lawyer, because waters and rivers in particular force us to ask the most difficult questions. Thus, I thank you for choosing this as the topic for us to discuss and debate over the coming 2 days. However, the notion of framing waters hasn't left me, even when I did entitle one book chapter according to it. In the spirit of exploring how to frame water, I have chosen to engage with 3 different boundaries rivers as regulatory objects invite. First, I examined the boundary between science and law. Second, the boundary between science, law and democracy. And third, the boundary between science, law, democracy, and sustainability. From these building blocks, I hope to build an argument on the role of law and the role of legal research for rivers in the era of ongoing and urgent sustainability transition. Let us now explore the first boundary, the boundary between science and law. Water management at the scale it has been attempted in the EU WFD, the Water Framework Directive, has been an ambitious endeavour, not only with regard to its management target, watersheds, river basins, but also with regards to its size. The science and law boundary that is present in the WFD is that of adaptive management as natural resources management paradigm and law. As an instrument, the WFD intentionally brings together science, policy and law in its attempt to conduct integrated and holistic water management across all EU waters. When science and law cohabit the same instrument, a continuum of decision-making emerges. Normative decisions with normative or axiological influence are taken gradually. Establishing scientific knowledge by gathering, analyzing and assessing data, making management decisions, and evaluating the management in administrative or judicial processes are all steps in that continuum. Thus, adaptive management as a form of natural resources management has also brought up questions of boundaries in its own right. How the lines between policy, knowledge gathering and management practice are drawn, and in which stage values or norms are decided upon and incorporated into the system. On a more practical level, the WFD is a good example of how the impact of a new legal instrument is not restricted to itself. The WFD has been an instrument that has internal and external influence. The obligation to enhance has been the external one, and the obligation to prevent deterioration of water quality has been the internal one. In both, the legal system has needed to come to terms with the fundamental feature of natural resources management, which is uncertainty. The need to come to terms with the uncertainty of environmental impacts and the development of the natural environment. As these kind of uncertainties are only bound to increase in the time of the polycrisis we live in, the lessons learned from the WFD may come of use in also other contexts. Contrary to how it is often assumed, law has found its ways to attune to the uncertainties there are. Though in theory, requirement of legal certainty is often contrasted with the need to adapt to changing circumstances, in administrative law, this has not been as straightforward. For example, when river basin management is done in cycles, in the case of the WFD in 6-year cycles, administrative permissions can be granted for the duration of the current cycle, meaning that the permissions are revised after new knowledge and information is available when the new cycle begins. Or, if there are no clear scopes of the water management and other legal instruments, the information gathered in the management can be used in other processes also without clear regulatory mandate. These examples do not, of course, mean that all undertakings would be a match with the water management. In particular projects where long-term and cumulative impacts are present and uncertain, the reality of not being able to accommodate management and law have been present. However, I would say that when it comes to the science and law boundary, when the science is understood as the water management, the boundary can be crossed, and well, at least in the context of WFD. However, no matter how fine-tuned our science and law interface would be, and even if it worked brilliantly, all will not end well if democracy is left out of the equation. Environmental law has the expertise, democracy dichotomy for a reason. Both sides must be taken into account. In the case of the WFD, much has been done to secure that participatory rights within the river basin management are fulfilled. When managing the river basins, public participation has its role. The river basin management is that heavily model-based that even participatory models have been brought up as one solution. This might be enough, and all might end up well, if legal systems weren't as complex as they are. But as the legal systems tend to be rather complex and nuanced, it has become evident that the rich and diverse lawscapes impact the effectiveness of these participatory measures. The WFD was a novelty quarter of a century ago, but when it was issued, all pre-existing legal structures and institutions remained in place. This has meant a plethora of processes intended to secure participatory rights that impact of the people that are impacted by water management and rivers. For example, industrial emissions are still regulated with administrative authorities, processes that have their own means to secure participatory rights are fulfilled. As the same applies to, for example, land use planning or building, it is no wonder that the impacted people and local communities may not always follow when it is time to use their voice and when that time is not yet there. The ongoing transition to sustainable societies adds its pressure to the question. For example, the demand of renewable energy is surging in Europe and outside of it. In Europe, certain land areas are more promising to extensive wind power production than others. As the demand for new, additional renewable energy has intensified, there are certain areas that have seen surge of new windmill parks. The speed and intensity of this development has caused also resistance from local communities. There are colleagues who have judged this kind of activity as NIMBYism, not in my backyards, but I have read the situation differently. When new windmills are erected on large scale, and here I talk about hundreds and hundreds of windmills across a river valley, they cause landscape change, also along the rivers. When familiar riverscape changes, it can easily cause solastalgia, which can be a driver to the resistance. Had the policymakers planned better the justness of the transition, this reality would have unfolded differently. The green transition must take place. It must happen rapidly, but it also must be just transition. Otherwise, democracy, rights of the people are not fulfilled to the extent they should. So, I am getting to the third boundary, the boundary of sustainability and all what is said above. The complexity of legal systems, together with their pronounced importance in executing their sustainability transition, has resulted in me becoming convinced that a keen eye to the detail is needed for law and legal research to serve its purpose the best. This applies to water law and water management law also. To avoid this focusing on the local context and details, to avoid that it lets the grander scheme of things out of sight, comparative law can be of help. Thankfully, at the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law Governing Board, I was not the only, nor the first, to think of the value of comparative research in researching sustainability and environmental law. Se-Ming Yang, our representative of Northern America, instigated a global comparative law survey this summer. In his words, Since the emergence in the 1970s, modern environmental law has spread all across the globe. The last several decades, however, has seen an acceleration of change, with environmental regulatory systems at the national and regional level, including in the developing world, becoming ever more sophisticated, complex, and diverse. End of quote. We at the Academy of Environmental Law want to be contributing to mapping this diversity. And as our community extends across the globe, we also have hopes of getting this done together with our community. I believe in the importance of this kind of environmental law research also outside of comparative setting. This specificity-oriented research as an approach is something that can be adopted in any kind of environmental law. And I find that the implications sustainability transition has on societies and their legal systems underlines the need of understanding better these sophisticated, complex and diverse ways environmental law operates in wherever it is applied. I have rooted this conviction in the works of Fernanda Piri, whose Anthropology of Law is my travel companion, also literally. On all the possible ways there are to understand the nature of law, Piri emphasizes law's capacity to create meaning. The ways in which law creates meaning are manifold. As Piri says it, and I quote, "Law creates the rules and categories in terms of which problems can be recast in order to make them more amenable to adjudication. It can also create new legal relationships outside of the courtroom. Legal categories provide a means of understanding, not just manipulating the world." End of quote. Let us think what this could mean. Legal categories, to rivers, river basin management, management and law, to all the ways law has dissected the hydrological circle, provide means of understanding the world. Means of understanding, not just manipulating or having one's own way. Importantly, if fully embracing all those meanings, law cannot be reduced to mere binary positions that could neatly explain the social legal realities we share. In Piri's own words, and I quote, "There is a tendency on the part of the anthropologists, and I should add here, legal scholars too, to be diverted into the easy paradigm of power and domination in the way, thereby reducing law to a matter of social control or governmental power, and obscuring its capacity to provide a meaningful map or model of the world." End of quote. He also says, "More importantly, does the insistence on a binary code not mask the subtleties and creative possibilities of legal systems?" These are the words that I have chosen to guide my research from now on. And truth be told, I feel that they have guided my work also for some years now. I just haven't read explicitly Piri's work when figuring out my way in environmental law. It is the subtleties and creative possibilities of law that we all could, and I would even say should, focus on. Comparative environmental law can unearth them, but so can any environmental and sustainability law. It just takes appropriate question setting and scoping to get the work done in this way. And this is where my thoughts take me back to international law. For I see similarities in this approach to what you, Professor Siddiqui and Padmanabhan, have recently argued in the international law sphere. When you explored India's contributions to international law discourses, I heard a call to remember more, remember better, remember in greater nuance and color. And after remembering, to include more diverse voices and understandings of our legal pasts and presents to the discourses, and eventually to law's forms and functions. We can see law and its role in societies in more nuanced, in more dynamic manner than of mere polar oppositions. be they power positions, dichotomies between science and law, or certainty and uncertainty, or postulated necessity to choose between riverscapes and renewable energy. If we see law as a meaning-making mechanism, we can start to bear witness and describe all the various ways this function is operated. And we can use that understanding to drive change, to adjust and green society. We can reimagine the law we have now and legal scholarship we do, so that they bring light to this diversity. They bring the diversity to our own knowledge and to knowledge of others. And we can make law to fit better the post-colonial and post-globalization era we live in. If we want to deliver on the pressing need sustainability transition poses for legal systems, this approach to legal research would be my preferred choice. Thankfully, I get to be here today, tomorrow with you, when we explore so many angles there are in law on rivers. From those different angles, I see a rise of more diverse viewpoints, more diverse arguments, more nuanced understanding on the role of law on rivers and for just and green societies. Thank you, and looking forward to listening your talks today.
Thank you, Dr. Tina Palanity, for an exceptionally informative talk. I would also now like to introduce our dignitaries of the dais who've traveled all the way from Bengal: Siddharth, Aishani, Ms. Ria Lopez, who are representing Veditum organization, which is tirelessly working on the issues of river management and sand mining. Please, welcome. Thank you. Now I would like to invite my friend, my mentor, and one of the most humble persons I know and I came across when I presented my paper at Ashoka University. I'm talking about Mr. Eklavya Prasad. Eklavya Prasad leads Make Pine Abhiyan that works in rural North Bihar and Jharkhand in India. In rural areas, MPA or Make Pine Abhiyan works on issues of resilience, adaptation to extreme weather, participatory groundwater management, safe and secure drinking water processes, sanitation, hygiene, and management. And in urban waterscape, MPA focuses on individual household rainwater harvesting, participatory action research. Eklavya has mentored immensely in the field of students' teaching and learning processes, and also shaping the future leaders who will be called as the future leaders or water leaders. A passionate photographer by choice, Eklavya has captured both the complexity and beauty of human spirit in rural and urban waterscape. And just to add on, in the evening, we will be beautifully displaying the work of both Eklavya and Siddharth, Veditum organization, and Make Pine Abhiyan through a photo exhibition which will be captured in our atrium. I welcome Eklavya Prasad. Over to you, sir.
Dear students, distinguished guests, respected academics, esteemed colleagues and friends. At the outset, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Vinayaka Missions Law School, Dr. Padmanabhan, Ms. Siddiqui and Ms. Basu for inviting me and honoring me as the guest of honor, which I'm really overwhelmed. And I'm truly humbled by this gesture and delighted to have the opportunity to listen, learn, and engage with all of you for the next 2 days. It is a great privilege to be here today at this important gathering of minds united by shared commitment to respect our rivers and the associated riverine communities. As we come together for this international conference on rivers, I want to express my appreciation to the organizers for creating a platform that moves beyond the world of academia and into the realm of real-world deliberations, actions, and advocacy. This conference, as I understand it, is not just an opportunity to share knowledge and exchange ideas. It is much more. It is a call to go beyond the armchair research, to step into the world where river flows, where people live, and where the real battle so my voice will
Look,
be and where the and where the real battles for the future are being fought. It is a call to give a voice to the voiceless, the rivers, the ecosystems, and most importantly, the people who are true stakeholders in this cultural, social, and political environment. We are all well aware of the fact that there is a power of research, and it plays an essential role in shaping policies, laws, and our understanding of the world. But too often, research can remain confined to academic circles. The data we collect, the papers we publish, and the models we develop are critical, but they must serve a larger purpose, driving change that matters to the communities whose lives are intertwined with the rivers we seek to respect and protect. Let me share how Make Pine Abhiyan, the organization that I'm working with, has come to understand and address the complexities of flooding in North Bihar. Initially, we started working in that area with this whole assumption that there is a single typology of flood, or the flood is a uniform phenomenon. And based on this assumption, we started developing strategies for safe drinking water and sanitation. However, very soon an internal assessment was carried on which highlighted that we required a deeper understanding of floods in Bihar. And what did we do? We went back to the riverine communities to engage with them. We went back to the riverine communities to understand their comprehension and their insights about flooding. And as a net result, and this happened across 5 districts, Supal, Saharsa, Khagadia, Madhubani, and Paschim Champaran. And in order to have a far more detailed, nuanced understanding about flooding in Bihar, we started undertaking studies to figure out, and in newer areas which we had never ventured, to figure out as to what is it and that we have missed as far as floods are concerned. Initially, we identified 3 types of floods: flash floods, riverine floods, and waterlogging. However, through indigenous knowledge and our dependence on the lived experiences of local communities, we uncovered almost 5 additional flood typologies of North Bihar. And at the moment, we have 8 different flood typologies in Bihar, which at one point of time was being projected as a single phenomenon. Now, by identifying these different typologies of floods, MP has been able to recognize the diverse impact these events have on local communities and ecosystem. And it has become central to our interventions and our articulations. So when we talk about drinking water in X place which has been impacted, we don't just see it as an impact of floods, we see it as an impact of X typology of flood. When we have to raise issues in terms of how the marginalized sections have been reduced to a kind of a state of helplessness, we don't just see that it has been an impact of floods. We have seen, and we tend to see it from how that particular typology of flood has impacted on the community. For example, we were working with a community which was on a very small river across, and the river was coming from, it is an unknown river, unrecognized river, and as Sir says, marginalized rivers, right? And for us, it's invisible rivers. These rivers, they tend to impact villages almost 30 to 40 times a year, and these are all flash floods. The information, the knowledge about these rivers do not even reach the district headquarters, forget about it reaching the state capital. So this is where our work on typologies really helped us to raise our voices, to start talking about it. And I'm glad that this year when the floods occurred, in the newspapers, thankfully, people were not writing in terms of floods in Bihar. They said there were 4 typologies of floods. At least from 0 typology, they have gone on to 4. Soon they would be going on to about almost 8 that we are talking about. So these typologies have since become central to our intervention and advocacy efforts, made possible by our willingness to change our own assumption and to step out of our comfort zone. We chose to listen to the indigenous community, small farmers, rural women, and countless others whose lives are intertwined with the rivers. Through this exercise, it became clear that the true stewards of our rivers are not just policymakers, scientists, bureaucrats, or aquacrats, as I call them, or civil society actors, but the communities who have lived in harmony with these waterways for generations. These are the people who have long understood the river's rhythms and delicate balance to sustain them. Thus, MP had no choice but to turn to these riverine communities for clarity, as many other sources failed to provide the insights we were trying to seek. Let me be clear that the knowledge and information we gathered from the primary stakeholders were not always consistent or aligned to each other. Often they were contradictory, conflicting, and even poles apart. Fortunately, we had approached them without any preconceived expectations. The diversity of perspective which we received helped us to become more attuned to the complexities of floods, its impact, and above all, the much touted flood management in Bihar. Yet far too often these voices are drowned by louder, more powerful interests and by those who see rivers as commodities. For decades, the voices of indigenous and local communities have been marginalized in decisions that directly affect their lives. Let me share an example by quoting a few lines of my recent article titled Impact of the Booming Flood Management Business in Bihar. Between 2005 and 2024, floods in Bihar have affected a staggering 119 million people. Some repeatedly, year after year, and some for the first time. The sheer number of those affected or impacted remains significant. It would be insightful to know how many of these 119 million people were consulted by politicians, bureaucrats, and aquacrats before approving the construction of the very structures that have since breached, plunging riverine communities into bottomless well of poverty, destitution, and helplessness. Let me cite a recent example from Bihar, which further substantiates my point. In some cases, unnecessary structures are constructed. When I say structures, these are flood management structures such as embankments. So in some cases, unnecessary embankments, oblique structures are constructed under the guise of providing security. Now, listen to this very carefully. It might be slightly confusing, but very interesting. For instance, in 2021, the Water Resources Department built a new embankment which connected the western Kosi embankment to that of the eastern Kamla Balan embankment. Okay, so there are the rivers in North Bihar. Most of the rivers have been embanked. That means an earthen wall has been made. So every time when we talk about people within the embankments, we always talk about people staying within the embankments of the same river system. While during our study and our research, we found out that there is an eighth, the eighth and the latest flood typology for us was the area which was sandwiched between the embankments of two different river systems. So here in this case, it was Kosi, the Kosi River and the Kamla Balan River. So both these rivers have embankments, and people who are in between technically are called people who are outside the embankment. But in reality, they are sandwiched between the two river embankment systems. So this is where the whole game was. So the WRD got a brilliant idea of why not link these two embankments and put a sluice gate there to ensure that the water that gets collected between these two embankments of two different river systems will drain out. Okay? And therefore, they did this construction, and previously this area was open. Whenever the Kosi used to be in spate, the water used to backflow into this area, stay on for some time, and then drain out. But more importantly, we did a study again on a river which was not known beyond that particular area. It's called the Gehua River. Again, a small, invisible, non-consequential, without any, I mean, there's no reason for anyone to give even 5 minutes of their life's time to even understand that river. So, ideally, that is the river which flows between these two embankments of these two river systems. Okay? When the breach happened in September 2024, as recent as 2024, it was the western embankment of Kosi that breached. The Kosi water entered the same area where Gehua was flowing, and which was banked by Kosi embankment, the new embankment, and the Kamla embankment. Had the new embankment not been there, this entire water would have flown, and the impact wouldn't have been there because there were no impediment. But because of this embankment, what happened was when the water entered this space, it not only came southwards, it went northwards. So people normally, when the breach happens, normally people think that northwards, anything upstream will not be affected. But here, that's exactly what happened. It's a trend. You see, our engineering minds, I'm really sorry if there are engineers, but the engineering minds are such that we tend to go beyond or against the nature as well. Things which need to go south starts going north as well. So it's larger space that gets the stamp of an engineering solution. So ultimately what happened? That new embankment got breached. Out of the 3 sluice gates, 1 got destroyed. So within one flood event, there were 2 embankments which got affected. One, and both of them, I don't know, at least the second one I would say was unnecessary. And there's a long debate going on as far as Kosi embankment is concerned. I don't want to get into it. So this incident underscores the flawed planning and implementation of embankment projects that often lead to increased vulnerabilities rather than providing effective flood management. I've just recently have come back from the flood affected areas of North Bihar. When I started work in 2005 there, and what I see of people now, there's not much of a difference. They are in the same state, if not in much worse condition. But the embankments, the flood control measures, they're going strong. They're getting better and better every year. The impact is kind of questionable. One can't say as to what has been the impact. So therefore, I would say it is time to challenge and change these dynamics. The idea of this conference is to give a voice to the voiceless. And this must be guiding principle in all our efforts to respect rivers. We must center the perspective of those who know the rivers best and who depend on them the most. We must listen to their stories, knowledge their plight and wisdom, and charter ways to include their thoughts in decision-making processes at every level. So, how did MPA go beyond mere studies and projects and attempted to give voice to the voiceless? First, we engaged directly with the communities living along the rivers. Fieldwork was not a mere requirement, but it was an ethical responsibility. It was about building trust and understanding the local realities that cannot be captured in data alone. It was about witnessing the struggles of people who are fighting for their life, their land, and their dignity. And it was about collaborating with them not as subjects of study or projects, but as equal partners in the search of solutions. I must emphasize that all our alternative approaches to ensuring year-round access to safe drinking water and hygienic sanitation in diverse flood typologies, the true architects have been the riverine community. They gave us the hope, insight, and expertise to develop these alternative practices that were never embraced by the mainstream. From innovating temporary rainwater harvesting system, both for collecting and storing water during floods, to creating local matka filters that treat water contaminated with iron, arsenic, and bacteriological contamination, they led the way. They also helped establish dug wells as the best local solutions for accessing iron and arsenic-free water, and pioneered ecological sanitation, which we called as Faidaman Shauchalaya, translated in Hindi, in English is beneficial toilets, designed to suit diverse flood typologies. Second, we advocated for the inclusion of these communities in policy formulations. It was not enough for us to study the problem. We also ensured that the solutions are inclusive and just. This means pushing for policies that recognize the rights of local and indigenous communities to their water resources and protect rivers from exploitation and degradation. It means being advocates, not just development practitioners. And I give you an example. Recently, I had the opportunity to work with the National Disaster Management Authority to draft the guidelines for approval and release of funds for coastal and river erosion under the National Disaster Mitigation Fund, and as well as a national policy on resettlement of people affected by erosion under National Disaster Response Fund, following the recommendation of the 15th Finance Commission. This was one of the most exhilarating experience of my career, as both the guidelines and the policies were accepted by the government this year, and they were shaped through consultation with affected communities from 8 states in the country. And these guidelines and policies were not made in isolation. Third, we also made efforts to amplify their voices on global platforms, though a lot more needs to be done. In international and national deliberations about river, climate, human-induced disasters, the unfiltered voice of people most affected by these issues are often absent. We must work to change that. We must create spaces for these communities to speak for themselves, to share their stories and be heard. Let us not forget the rivers themselves. They are ultimate voiceless beings, unable to defend themselves from the harm inflicted upon them. But they speak to us in other ways, through the floods that devastate communities, the drying riverbeds that leave land barren, and loss of biodiversity that signals the collapse of ecosystem. It is our duty to be their voice, to advocate for their right to exist, to flow freely, and to sustain life. To effectively revive our rivers, we need to foster partnerships between lawmakers, academicians, local communities, environmentalists, scientists, and others. It is only through such alliance that we can address the complexity of the challenges that the rivers face. As we gather at this conference, let us remember that our task is just not to exchange knowledge, but to foster a deeper understanding of the lived experiences of those who depend on our rivers. Our responsibility goes beyond research. It extends to advocacy, to action, and to ensuring that most vulnerable among us are heard and respected. We must commit to promoting legal frameworks that are informed by needs of communities and guided by the principle of environmental justice. We need laws that protect not just the economic interest tied to rivers, but the long-term health of the rivers themselves. Together let us move from theory to practice, from research to real-world impact, Let us ensure that the rivers and the communities who rely on them are given the due voice they deserve. Only then we can truly hope to respect, protect, and revive our rivers for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Eklavya. And I think you'll be very happy to note that VMLS has undertaken the task of working with the fishing communities in Chennai, Tamil Nadu. We're starting a project, all thanks to Satyamurthy sir and VMRF, who has diligently funded our project, and we'll be starting this soon. And of course, all the learnings that we've taken from you and of course other stakeholders, we would also like to interact with the communities and try to know the nerve and vein of the issues and how we could help the community better. Thank you, Eklavya. I would now like to introduce Dr. Ramaswamy. Dr. Ramaswamy specializes in remote sensing and geoinformatics modeling and visualization of paleo-time transgressive active geological systems and processes for mineral, hydrocarbon, and water resources exploration, earth ecosystems, modeling in the hill, plain, riverine, coastal, and desertic systems, natural disaster mapping, mitigation, management, spatial decision support system for sustainable development, and geoarchaeology. Currently, as a professor of eminence and as a chair, distinguished Professor Ramaswamy is a professor of eminence at Bharati Dasan University, Trichypalli. He carries out advanced academic research and extension activities in remote sensing areas and geoinformatics. Over to you, Professor.
No, I'm comfortable here. Yeah, I am comfortable. You should try it. Good morning. Why the...
Hello.
Hello. Good morning, the luminaries on the dais, and the luminaries of the dais, and my dear student participants and other delegates. Good morning to all of you, and I am very much delighted to be here today to participate in this important conference organized by the Vinaya Mission School, about which I knew for the past 25-30 years, though we have not interacted much with private this university. And I'm thankful for you for having invited me. In fact, I must tell that I must convey my thanks to Advocate Gopinathan, who has extended an invitation and who has pursued me to that I must come over here and participate in this workshop, this conference. I told him, I thought you are all legal luminaries. And amongst legal luminaries, what I can speak? I told, no, Professor, though we are going to discuss, or the conference may broadly discussed on the societal or the governance or transboundary issues related to rivers. Since you are working in this field for the past more than 3-4 decades on the river systems, you see remote sensing, you can tell something about the green room activities of the rivers. So I am thankful to Mr. Gopinath. And now to the recent years, I am working on the sunken cities of the world. We have taken up Pumbhar, one of the major submerged city during the establishment of the Chola dynasty. So our concentration is more on archaeology. But again, that's the river mouth port, so we are considerably working on the river systems. And I'm also thankful to Dr. Yegaleva Prasad that he has laid a foundation for my talk, because I'm going to talk mostly on the green room activities of the rivers, which the legal people, or the people who are working on social issues, or people who are working on the water management issues, may not be studying the green room activities of the rivers, which is the foundation for everything. So Yagalavan, you know that Yagalavan Dronacharya in Mahabharata, when he refused to teach him, he imagined Drona and then he has learned by himself. Now from Yagalavan I have taken up and I have learned from him. So my dear friends, I will talk on just for 20-25 minutes, I will flash on what is the green room activity that is going on in the river systems, which are very much vital for the water management issues, what all he has been talking so far. Next. I will type that somebody. Yes. You know very well the river, very interestingly, the river is very important. You all know very well that no, it is going. Yes. No, I will manage, no problem. The rivers are major resources of water. You must know. We all know about it. So the rivers will have to be properly managed and nurtured, for which you will have to understand the riverine systems very carefully, be it for the societal issues, or for the governance, or for legal, or for the trans-boundary issues. Whatever it is, you will have to understand the riverine systems. How to understand the riverine system means what are the life histories of the rivers, how they perform invisibly, which only people like us, of course, we are working in that field. It is not that tough to you because you are mostly technocrats and then the legal luminaries. The rivers have 3 stages in life. One is called the youthful stage, and the mature stage, and the old stage. 3 stages. That is, water falls on the surface of the earth, either from the rain or from the snow melt. Its one and the only effort is to reach the sea as quick as possible and as early as possible. So, these rivers, what they will do, as soon as they just fall on the surface of the earth, they will try to vertically cut the hills. Let us say the hill is about 3,000 meters above the mean sea level. The 3,000 meters it will try to hit, vertically cut, make deep gorges, erode lot of materials and dump it in the foothills. Once they reach this stage is called as a youthful stage, because since they are on the top of the hill, their effort is to reach the base level, or their effort is to reach the mean sea level. They will vertically cut. The one and the only activity it performs will be to erode the material and dump it, just like Himalayan rivers are dumping in the foothills of Himalayas. Thus, their effort is, their activity is very turbulent and vibrant, like human beings. This is called as a youthful stage of the river. The youthful stage of the rivers are very dangerous rivers. That is what he has been explaining. It is something related to the human beings of 0 to 20 years old. That is they will be very turbulent and vibrant. Then as soon as it reaches the foothills, since they have climbed down, let us say 1,500 meters, still only 1,500 meters it has to go, it will dump, but it will flow with less speed because it has lost its energy, or 50% of the energy it has lost, for example. So it will flow with a sinus path. All Indo-Gangetic rivers, what Dr. Yegaleva Prasad was telling, they will flow with a sinus path, erode on one side and deposit the sediments on the other side. Since they are flowing with this maturity, they are called as matured rivers, or mature stage, or this is called watch and walk phase. Just like the man of 20 to 50 years. For everything he will have watch. He has to watch on his mother's side, he has to watch on his wife's side, he has to watch on his children's side, societal side and all, everything. That is why they are called as a mature stage. Then as soon as they reach the coast, they have reached the 0 level, so they will lose all their energy. They will not be able to carry the sediments what they have brought. As a result, they will move in a Brownian way, haphazard way here and there, and dump all the sediments and develop deltas. This is mature stage. This is almost over 60 years, Brownian phase. So this is a typical stage of the river. You see, this is the upper stage or youthful stage where only vertical cutting will be there. The sediments will be dumped here. And then as soon as it reaches the plains, it will flow with the oscillatory path. All the Indian rivers, what are doing in the plains. Then as soon as it reaches the coast, it will just flow in a very compressed meander, and ultimately it will dump the sediments to the coast. This will have to be understood. Before interacting with any river for developmental activity, you will have to understand what is the stage and the internal dynamics or the green room activities of the rivers. So this is mature stage and this is old stage. Now again, this is a satellite picture that is showing the youthful stage of the river. You see the gullying, how much gullying it has made. Here, you cannot control the river at all. It will be just like a vibrant bull or a vibrant boys of 0 to 20, 25 years. You can't control them. They will just do in a very different way, with a strong force. You can't construct any dams, or you can't construct any reservoirs, or you cannot do any developmental planning in these type of river systems in the youthful stage. Unsuitable areas for dams and reservoirs will go below that. Suppose you construct a dam in this type of youthful stage rivers, the dam will be here, but the river will vertically cut inside and go, because it has to reach the sea, attain the sea level, it will vertically cut and then go. Number of rivers are there around the world with this typical example. Then this is the old and mature stage of this is the youthful stage of Himalayan rivers. In this area, you cannot have any developments. But even then, we have number of dams. That is why they are taking a lot of predictive and protective measures to manage these dams. And this is the mature stage of the Himalayan rivers, like your Brahmaputra or Ganges or Yamuna or whatever it is. They just dump the sediments there on the top of it. So this area is an ideal area for development. That is where a lot of developmental activities are going on. Then this is the old stage, just like Bengal Delta or the East Bengal Delta or West Bengal Delta, Bangladesh Delta, whatever it is. You cannot have any development because it will be a flood-prone area and sedimentation-prone belt. Now this is the mature stage of Kaveri River. Whatever red bands you are seeing in this satellite picture, those are all the areas where the river has oscillatory flow on either side. They will have mineral potential, water potential, and favorable areas for dams and reservoirs. At the same time, it is flood prone also. It's a again, a complex system which you will have to understand before taking any development for water management or flood management or risk management, whatever it is. Then this is Tamarabarni River in the southern part of India. Here, it does not have, this is again a satellite picture, does not have the youthful stage as well as the old stage. The entire stage is the mature stage. Just like a man is born at the age of 20 years and lives only up to 60 years. He will have watch and walk phase only. But this indicates that this area is subsiding. The whole belt is subsiding, so this entire area is prone for flooding. So you will have to take a lot of measures for controlling the flood. That is, the Tamarabarni River is all the time flooding. Now this is the satellite picture of the mature stage of Indus. This is the Indus River flow, but the Indus has earlier flown here. At 300 kilometers, it has migrated towards northwesterly in parts of Pakistan. These are called the unparalleled floodplains, which indicates that the river has migrated towards this side because of the rise of this land, Aravalli Mountains, and then the obstruction by that the Indus suture zone. I'm not going into the other details, but here the water potential will be more less in this part, and potentials will be high in this part. If a flooding zone is, that is, the floodplains are more here and floodplains are less here. This is shown for flooding, prone for flooding, and this area will be having better water prospects. And this is Mississippi River, old stage of the delta, typical old stage of the delta here, because once the rivers lose and then reach the base level of erosion or reach the shore, it will be flowing here, then flowing here, then flowing here, and flowing here. It will be dramatically flowing on different directions. So, that any development practice or any water management practice in deltaic regimes, you will have to be very careful in understanding the dynamics of the delta movement. This is happening even today. In Bengal fan, it is happening. In all South Indian deltas, this type of changes are happening. So it's a very difficult area to tackle with for any water management. Happens at movement of the river, multi-directional flood, extension sediment process. Even irrigation is an uncertain one. If you have irrigation this time here, or here you have irrigation, the next year, probably delta will move here and then sand cast the interior. That is happening in Brahmaputra. Or if you are having irrigation here, this delta will grow this side. So this is an yearly event or cyclic event. Now this is multiple stages of delta growth. This is one delta here, another delta here. Wherever these type of multiple deltas are there, you will have flower-shaped water bodies arranged, ring after ring. Those can be better areas for water harvesting, even though they are in the old stage. So there are complexities in this type of river systems. Now these are all the youthful stage, mature stage, and old stage. And another interesting dynamics also the rivers they submerge on the land itself. They will be just flowing, and unknowingly, without the other constraints, they will just submerge into the land and will not be able to flow further. Because the typical example is the China, that is called a China Vintuyaram in Tamil. That is here, the Chiang River, the satellite picture, and the Z River, and the Yang River. These rivers are flowing from different directions and then come to this land. Suppose, one interesting thing the river dynamics is, the river is flowing a terrain, normal terrain with the elevation it will flow, but a very low land is there which is below the level of the mean sea level, then it will struggle. It will not be able to flow further. As a result, since this Chagai plain in China is about 35,000 to 40,000 square kilometers is below the MSL, these Kiang, and Yang rivers, they just come and then join together. They are not able to flow. After a lot of research studies now, they have opened up a river system there in the northeast early and then draining it, and the Shanghai city has been developed. So here, the flood management is different because it is an inherent habit of the river, since the land itself is low-lying land. Then another type of rivers are also there, in addition to youthful stage or old stage or mature stage, are the submerging drainage systems or inland drainage systems. Sea influenced rivers are also there. The sea will be all the time interacting with the river, because the only counterpart which will aberrate the life cycle of the river systems are the sea. For example, once the river is born on the surface of the earth, it will decide its constant length. But when we are born on the surface of the earth, we don't decide our age. But it will have its constant length. Suppose it decides that 100 kilometers only it will flow, means for 100 kilometers it will flow. Then let us say from 100 kilometers, the sea has come and eaten 40 kilometers, means this 40 kilometers length, it will compress like a worm. Then again it comes further here, further it will compress. Like that, you can see this picture, that will be very clear. This river has got 100 kilometers length, means it is its proximal length throughout its life. Then let us say this sea has come by 40 kilometers. We call it as a marine transgression process. The transgression process, if it comes, the river will compress like a worm. When it comes 60 kilometers, it will again further compress. When it goes back to 80 kilometers, it will open up. When it's going 100 kilometers, it will flow straight. When it's going 120 kilometers, it will flow up to 100 kilometers and bury inside and will flow as an inland river. Inland river you cannot have. Sota, Sabi and Banganga rivers in Rajasthan are typical example. Many rivers are there around the world. Even Ganges, there are such rivers. There are such tributary rivers. You can see these compressed meanders of Tinak River in Philippines. So satellite picture, you can see how the river is oscillating. Because the sea is compressing and compressing, going, coming, going, coming, going, coming. So the river is not able to have flow. So all these banks will be prone for erosion. Banks will be prone for the flooding. And they cannot have any irrigation because we don't know in which season it is going to just get compressed. This is because of the tidal action and then as well as the compression, as well as the sea level rise. Then another thing, this is an interesting river, Vaigai in Tamil Nadu. This is a satellite picture. This is Madurai city. The sea was here right up to here. So the river has flown and then developed a delta near Madurai. It has this type of phased recession of the sea. The rivers will form delta after delta and water tanks, water bodies in an arcuate fashion. First stage of delta, then again the sea has receded up to here, then the river has extended, developed second series of delta. Second series of delta. Delta means not simply dumping here. Here because the tides will be coming and interacting with it. As a result, rings after rings, the water bodies will be formed. Then again, the sea has regressed further. Then again, the other stage of water body. Thousands of water bodies are there. There's a classical delta in the world, the Vaigai Delta. The thousands of water bodies can be desilted and then effective water harvesting can be done in this type of low bed deltas. This is another peculiar situation. Then another important dynamic of the rivers. That is what Dr. Ayala Prasad and other people, they are working only on these type of areas. Migration. The river will migrate. Not a mythic river. Saraswati is a river that has improved. I worked there for 17 years in those areas before coming into South India as an academician, and I was in Government of India as the Geological Survey of India as a scientist. So we have proved the buried channels of the Saraswati river flown right up to Allahabad. Now again, when Aravalli started rising, Saraswati got drifted and started flowing towards the desert. Then this Aravalli kept on rising. As a result, the Saraswati has gradually drifted towards westerly in a clockwise direction. You can see this here, this is Aravalli mountain. Now Aravalli started rising, so Saraswati has flown here, Saraswati has flown there, flown in different parts of the desert. But when it was flowing like that, the sand at once, lot of sand at once came from here, which they could not manage the sand at once. So sand drones also operated this Saraswati river. So it has gradually started migrating in a rotatory fashion, anti-clockwise rotatory fashion. And ultimately, when it has reached the northern part of the desert, it started looking at Indus. So in order to catch up Indus, suppose you are bringing the children from the market, they will be holding your hand as long as you reach your street. When they look at your own house, they will start running. Like that, this river, when it started seeing its mother channel by the Indus, this is Indus, it started migrating further northerly to Gaggar. But by the time this has migrated, Indus has migrated 300 kilometers towards northwesterly in Pakistan. As a result, it got buried as Gaggar. So the entire desert, Thar desert, there are tons and tons and tons of buried Saraswati river inside, which mythologically and archaeologically people are doing a lot of studies on that. But from the river management point of view, the desert is flooded now. That is because of the snow melt, all the water that is coming in Bias river is getting charged in this desert area. The desert flooding has also become very common. Barmar is flooded recently. Jodhpur has flooded. Even in desert you are seeing flooding only because of this buried river. Another interesting project we have done on this, that is, here the Indira Gandhi canal they wanted to have, they had it about 40 years ago when I was working, for converting this entire area into a green blanket. Desert they wanted to convert into a green blanket. But three major ecological imbalance we found in that if you are creating a desert by cutting the dunes, the stabilized sand dunes, when you are cutting it, the dunes will migrate towards Delhi, number one. Number two, when you are creating green revolution here, the water will become more saline, entire area will become saline, infested area, like this. The northern side you are seeing the saline packets. The third one is, when the blankets of water body moisture is there, the sand that is coming will be dumped. So sand will also be dumped and sand will also be moving. The fourth major environmental imbalance is, when you are converting a desert ecosystem, arid ecosystem, into a green belt ecosystem, the atmospheric depression that is caused in summer will go down. As a result, the Delhi will not get rain. So, by creating a green revolution here, you are simply creating a desert there, pushing the desert. So, you will have to understand the internal dynamics of the Mother Earth, internal dynamics of the river systems, and do development. Whether you are doing for water management or drinking water management or sanitation studies or for flood management or bank erosion, whatever it is. The same thing is to the Brahmaputra. Brahmaputra, one side, Himalaya is rising. So that is being pressured here, pushed towards south. At the same time, copious water is coming. Huge quantity of water is coming. Then Indian plate is pushing towards northerly. This has been estimated to few centimeters. We are working on it. Because of that, the Assam plateau is rising. This side is also rising, that side is also rising. So this river is flowing with a lot of strain. For example, once it has flown in the south, here, then again it has flown in the north, again it has flown in the north. So, one year it will be flowing this side, another year it will be flowing this side. This is the case with the Kosi. This is the case with the Ganges. It is flowing with the strain. As a result, they are not able to have bridges to cross Brahmaputra. That is why, because of the uncertainty of the flows, they are not able to construct any bridges. So you will have to very carefully understand in detail about this river dynamics. This is about Brahmaputra. Then again, even irrigation they are not able to make. Because this side, suppose somebody has made irrigation here, the next year this river may flow here. Or the next year it may flow here. This is about the migratory pattern of the Brahmaputra. Again, Kosi is another typical example what he was telling. Kosi was earlier flowing like this towards this side, but this is called Kosi cone or Kosi fan. This is gradually sliding because of the rise of Himalayas. Already the Kosi has dumped its fan like a cone. Because of the rise of Himalayas, the fan is sliding. Because of the sliding here, 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 because of that, the Kosi river, which was flowing easterly, like this, it has been pushed towards westerly. Then again now, a straight river is now flowing in an arcuate way. Then now this entire area is flooded. So this is the reason for the Kosi flood. For Kosi flood, you will have to understand the tectonic dynamics and the river dynamics and the flow, everything. This is a very interesting example how Kosi river is getting flooded. Similarly, in South India, I will finish with this. I will take 5 minutes and finish. Kaveri river, interestingly, it has flown from Talakaveri, came up to here, then it started flowing via Vaniyambadi, Ambur, Valajabat and Chennai. It has flown along Chennai, up to Chennai. Even your Kuvam is a part of your Palar. Kuvam is a part of your Kaveri, one of the branches of Kaveri. About 25 years ago when I wrote, there were a lot of furor. Now people have agreed. So now, Araniyar, Kottalayar, Adayar, Kuvam. All of the rivers are the left out channels of Kaveri over which these rivers have occupied. Then when the land started rising this side, this has left its trace over which Valar has started, it has started flowing via present-day path of Ponnayar in central Tamil Nadu. Then when a lot of storm surges activities were there, for the last 5,000 years, there was a lot of storm surges activities. This is about 5 lakhs years to 3,000 years. This is 2,700 years to 2,300 years. Then it has left the trace and flown southerly. By the time a crack has developed here, it has flown here. Pudukkottai Vellar, Ambuliyar, Akkaniyar, Vennar, Vettar, Arasala, Padangutti, Palangaveri, Kaveri. It has flown like this and then like this. This is about 2,300 years to 1,200 years. We are studying it with the carbon-14 dating now for our Pumbuar project. So these migratory rivers again, the entire Chennai city is almost in Kaveri Delta. That is why some apartment has subsided, some were flooding. Flooding is taking place in huge quantum because it is just like your Bengal fan. This entire area is a delta of Kaveri. Here it has flown, then it has flown towards Araniyar, Kottalayar, Kuvam and Adayar. Then again it has come to Palar. Present day Palar has subsequently occupied. Then these are called misfit rivers. Over that, the rivers have misfit subsequently. Once Kaveri has left its trace, one Chinnar has misfit, then Palar has misfit. Misfit means occupying the previous river's course. These type of misfit rivers, when you are tackling with misfit rivers for water management, you will have to be careful because it will have double characters. It will have its, just like suppose I am having a character of my father and myself. I am a trivial personality. These are all trivial river systems. The river systems will have their ancestral habit and its own flow dynamics. These two will be combined together and then only it will flow. So you will have to be careful before developing these rivers. Then again, this is also misfit. Your Ponnayar is also misfit, and all the Kaveri drainage systems are misfit. This is here, it has come here, it has flown here, it has flown here, it has flown here, it has flown there. All these rivers are misfit afterwards. Now this is how Kaveri, you see the buried rivers, how it looks like in satellite picture. This is the actual river, these are all, this is the present day river, this is the buried river. From here it has migrated. So here, northern bank will be flood prone, southern bank will be flood free. southern bank will be stable, northern bank will prone for erosion, and the northern bank will have better water potential like that. So there are complicated analogy in that, what he was talking, like this. And this is the delta of Chennai region, where entire Chennai region is having a big delta. That is why we have all the flooding problem. I think I will close with this. Then, from there, from the buried rivers, two things we have come out from this. That is, for interlinking of rivers, you need not put canals. You can make use of the buried rivers as pathways, and you can make these the dry beds of the rivers to carry the water from one place to one place. As a model, we have submitted to Government of India this. Suppose this is the buried river of Kaveri in Chennai. We have suggested that you have pumping here, pump the water to this much distance. Then you have the tunnel here. From the tunnel, you have the canal here. From the canal, then larger part of the distance, you carry the water along the dry beds of the Palar. The dry beds of Palar and the buried channels of Palar. So this is the conceptual framework we have already given to Government of India, how to make use of, and Government of Tamil Nadu also, how to make use of the buried rivers as well as the dry channels of the river beds for carrying the water. I think with this I will close. This is how a model, how pumping could be done. Then from pumping, then tunneling, and then bring it to the river systems. I think I will close with this other part. Similarly, how to link Kaveri with the Vaigai. There's a buried river, you bring like this and then make the water to flow like this. Then all these thousands of water bodies, you just store the water. Because Vaigai is completely dry, a lot of flooding is taking place in Kaveri, means that flood water can be diverted by check damming, by anchors, dams and reservoirs, and divert the water and bring it here. So this is also a major work that has been done. So the sum and substance is that whether it is for your societal activity or for water development planning or for linking of the rivers or for any legal boundary issues, especially with the rivers, you will have to understand the life history of the rivers. That is what the sum and substance I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ramaswamy, for an excellent Thank you, Dr. Ramaswamy, for an excellent presentation. We've actually explored the idea of rivers from science and law perspective, from stakeholder and community engagement, and finally wrapping up with the lens of geography. So I think overall, we've actually delved into the idea of understanding rivers. And with this, I would now like to invite Professor Dr. Winfred Chalaya, Associate Dean Campus Affairs, to give the vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Distinguished guests on the stage and off the stage, delegates and members of the audience, it's my privilege to share the vote of thanks at the end of the inaugural session as the grand finale. First, I'd like to thank our chief guest who come all the way from Finland to share with us a global perspective and giving us a very clear framework so that we could really have our boundaries of thinking and reflection and decision making for this lovely initiative. Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to thank Dr. Klavia Prasad for having given us a very, very balanced presentation between insights in a conference like this and the actionated initiatives that have to necessarily follow. We are so happy, so excited cognitively when we gather in a forum like this and focus all our attention and converge our thinking on issues of this kind, but leave it hanging. We are so grateful to Sir for having emphasized so excessively, so convincingly that actionated initiatives ought to follow research initiative and reflective togetherness in this forum. Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank Dr. Ramaswamy for his passionate portrayal. I have understood very clearly all about rivers. I was so fortunate to sit here and then listen to him, and for having wrapped up the entire thing, giving us a very clear idea about the river dynamics and all kinds of, types and typologies that we were talking about. We're so grateful to you, sir, for having given us a very, very practical approach to the entire thing. And I'm able to see a lovely sequence for this inaugural session. We started in a global note, came down to Bihar, and he contextualized, giving us a very, very, very detailed account of Tamil Nadu and the river potential of the state. I'm so grateful to all the eminent guests who have taken the time to come to us, honoring our invitation, and your presence means so much to us. I'd like to thank the management for having financed this lovely initiative, and we're so happy that the management has been so liberal in facilitating these initiatives so cheerfully and so passionately. In absentia, I'd like to thank the management. I'd like to thank the Dean for having set the tone for the entire thinking initiative. Thank you, sir, for having given us a very clear idea about the speciality and the uniqueness of our vision as a management, how we are trying to really fill the gaps and make sure that the vision becomes a mission in terms of visible results in the days to come. Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank the organizers for having worked hard, sequenced the entire thing so convincingly so that the flow I'm able to see for the 2 days, and I'm sure we have a very, very collective feast of cognitive thinking, reflection, and findings. I'd like to thank all the delegates for having come and participated so cheerfully, so willingly, so involvedly in the entire program. Thank you so much, students, for having given your share in raising this program and this morning special session. So many people have worked behind the screen, worked very hard for the last 1 week, intensively. I'd like to thank each one of them for having contributed so cheerfully, so willingly, your might to raise this lovely inaugural session, which is a very, very strong initiation of a flow of thought together. When you are together, something wonderful should come out of this, and it should lead us into very, very clear mapping of the action plans that we would have. Thank you so much, and God bless this wonderful initiative. And let's really go through the journey together, converging all our experience and expertise, and make sure that something concrete comes out of this initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I would now request the dignitaries to head towards the conference hall. Rudra, Professor Najit, please accompany the guest. Shavaik sir, it would be great if you could be there. हाँ. Yeah. Remy holds undergraduate law science honors and French degrees from Monash University, Australia, and a Masters of Law from the University of Cape Town's Institute of Marine and Environmental Law, where he was an honorary research associate from 2015 to 2018. Mr. Remy is a legal officer working with the Secretariat of the United Nations Water Convention, serviced by UNECE. An environmental lawyer by training with process in Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, Asia Pacific, and on transboundary water allocation. Prior to joining the UN in 2019, he lived and worked for many years across Asia with environmental rights and humanitarian NGOs, having previously worked in law firms, academia, and consulted on international environment and water law in Asia, Africa, globally. Remy has joined us online and will be delivering the welcome address.
Thank you, everybody, for the introduction. And thank you, distinguished guests, colleagues. I'm in the unusual situation of not being able to hear anybody in the room. So it's going to be a bit of a one-way street with this presentation. But I firstly want to thank the organisers for the ability and the invitation to do this keynote presentation during the conference on law, diplomacy, ecology, rethinking governance of the transboundary Ganges Basin. And it's a real privilege and pleasure to be here with you all and with such distinguished panelists as well. I'm going to do a brief presentation, so I'll just share my screen so you can see my presentation. Okay, so just as a way of introduction, my name is Remy Kinner. I'm a legal officer with the Water Convention Secretariat. My background is in international environmental law with a specialisation in international water law. And my focus areas under the convention, I'm the staff responsible for Asia Pacific, so covering South Asia, also East Africa and South Africa. And also I'm the staff responsible for water allocation. So they're my primary areas under the convention, and I've been invited here today to give this keynote on what I've titled The Role and Relevance of the United Nations Water Conventions in Hydrodiplomacy in Transboundary Basins. What is the value add for South Asia? Now, I wanted to start my presentation just to talk a little bit about this intersection between international law and hydrodiplomacy. International water law, for those who are not familiar with it, establishes principles that benefit all riparian states and ensure predictability and consistency between states. They are an instrument of preventative diplomacy through transparency and predictability, and also confidence building between the parties to such agreements and institutions. And given the topic of today's presentation, I put down an example there, which you're all very familiar with, which is the 1996 Ganges Water Sharing Treaty between Bangladesh and India, which I do also note, was signed and adopted almost 30 years ago now. So it's due to be up for renewal very soon. So I'll talk a little bit about, how some of the tools and how some of this work on international water law and diplomacy might be featured into your work in the work that you do. So when we talk about international water law and international water agreements, they operate at different scales. As you can see there, we have, I've highlighted there where the Ganges Treaty fits into this integrated framework of international water law. The Ganges also being one of 3 basins in the Ganges Brahmaputra Meghna system. And the agreement covers the Ganges and it covers the 2 parties. But as you can see from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, international water law operates at different scales. So at the global scale, we have 2 global water conventions, and I'll talk about those in more detail next. We also have some regional agreements, one of them being the SADC Revised Protocol on Shared Watercourses, which covers all countries that are parties in the Southern African Development Community. We also have such things as the EU Water Framework Directive and also the directives in the Economic Community of West African States and also East African States. At basin level, we have agreements such as the Zambezi, Orange Cinco agreements, as I said, sub-basin agreements as well. And this shows you that as you go from the global scale, which are quite very general in nature, you go further down closer to the context, you're getting much more specific and more detailed agreements that are very driven by the particularities of the basins that we're talking about and the citizens within those basins. So at the global level, the global agreements, the conventions are there to provide a basic baseline by which countries can support and buttress and reinforce the existing agreements that they have in place. So there are 2 conventions operating at the global level. There is the 1992 Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses in International Lakes, known as the Water Convention, which is the secretariat which I work for, and also which may be known to some of you. It was open for global accession in 2016. It currently has 55 parties, with 20 more countries in accession processes. So there is a very big uptick in momentum and interest in this global convention. And I'll talk a little bit more because it comes a lot down to the practical support that countries and partners can get through the convention. Now, there's also the 1997 Convention on the Law of the Non-Navigational Uses of International Watercourses, otherwise known as the Watercourses Convention. It entered into force in 2014, which is through the ratification by Vietnam, was the 35th party making the quorum, and it currently counts 39 parties. Crucially, though, the Watercourses Convention does not have an institutional framework. So it is a treaty on paper. It is a very good treaty. It comes from the General Assembly. And it was also, there was several decades of preparation by the International Law Commission, but also at the same time, as a treaty, it does not have an institutional framework for its implementation. So it's up then to countries themselves to implement the provisions of the convention and also work with their transboundary neighbours for the implementation of those provisions. So what is the importance of these global water conventions? Because as you know, a lot of countries, a lot of basins have existing agreements in place. So where is the value that these global conventions can have, either for developing agreements or for strengthening agreements that are already in place? Well, the conventions are instruments of preventative diplomacy. As we said, they create predictability and transparency between riparian states. They crucially support transboundary cooperation when it is not established. And what I mean by that is that there are specific areas where transboundary water cooperation either isn't established or could be strengthened. So there are some areas of the world where there are not legal agreements or institutions in place at the basin level, which is currently more than 60% of basins worldwide. There's also agreements that maybe have different principles of international water law, customary international law, that are not contained in the provisions of their agreement. And that may be because there was a specific design by the parties. It could be that they are a very old treaty by relative time standards, and that they maybe haven't seen the development with customary practice. Also, there are particular basin agreements where not all of the basin states are parties to those agreements. So there are gaps. So there might be gaps of countries missing, there might be gaps of provisions missing, and this is where the conventions can fill those gaps and also clarify and strengthen existing provisions. The conventions promote the gradual improvement of cooperation through different sharing experiences and good practice as part of a community of practice. Crucially, the conventions support but do not replace existing treaties. So where existing treaties are in place, those existing provisions and obligations still stand, and the conventions then seek to buttress those existing obligations and help to facilitate further implementation of provisions at the basin level. And they can strengthen particular technical topics such as climate change adaptation. Why is it important for hydrodiplomacy to facilitate the development of agreements and even the strengthening of agreements? Well, what we do is, as part of the Sustainable Development Goals, under Sustainable Development Goal 6 on water and sanitation, there is a particular indicator that talks about strengthening transboundary cooperation on integrated water resources management through the establishment of agreements and institutions. And so SDG indicator 6.5.2 measures the proportion of transboundary basins around the world that have an operational water cooperation mechanism. And what do I mean by water cooperation mechanism? It measures it in two ways. It measures both if there is an agreement of some kind between the countries, and it also measures, is there a way that the countries are operationalizing that agreement? So is it through an authority, is it through a joint commission, is it through an institution that then can help the countries to implement the provisions of that agreement? In the last round of reporting, which was just concluded in 2023, we had 129 countries voluntarily respond out of the 153 UN member states with sharing transboundary waters. Only 43 countries, this is where we see the gaps, only 43 countries have operational arrangements in place for 90% or more of their transboundary waters. Crucially for your context and the context we're talking about in the Ganges, we really need to see particular progress in Asia Pacific, but also particularly in South Asia. And I'll come back to that a little bit, where there are agreements in place within the South Asian context, but what we see is that they're generally bilateral in nature. And this is also where I think the global conventions can add value, because there are a lot of existing bilateral arrangements that maybe don't capture all of the basin states, or are missing particular provisions, or are quite, have been in place for several decades and maybe haven't evolved with the common practice of international custom. And this is where the conventions could potentially add value in strengthening those agreements. I'll just go back. And as I said, progress needs to be made so that all transboundary basins are covered by an operational arrangement by 2030. And in particular, groundwater is something that we find in our responses is very missing from countries, in the fact that they don't have much data, and that's often not included in transboundary agreements. So with that, I come back to the global conventions and how can they support. And as you can see here, the call for utilizing these global tools is coming from the highest levels of the United Nations. So the UN Secretary General at the UN Water Conference last year in 2023, one of the first UN conferences specifically on water in almost 50 years, said that we must accelerate efforts to work together across borders, and I urge all countries to join and implement the United Nations Water Convention, which promotes managing shared water resources sustainably. And I want to talk now specifically about the Water Convention, and I want to talk about how it supports countries and how it can support your countries, but also academia, civil society, because it is a multi-stakeholder platform. So we welcome academia, we welcome civil society, we welcome NGOs, we welcome international organizations, and obviously we welcome governments from countries to participate in this platform. So the Water Convention, the 1992 Water Convention, is a global legal but also institutional framework for transboundary cooperation. Let me just go back, sorry. Contributing to sustainable development, international peace and security, and that's where the hydro diplomacy aspect is that the aim of this is for obviously transboundary water management, but transboundary water management is a vehicle for sustainable development, peace and security. It is a unique platform to discuss transboundary cooperation under the umbrella of the United Nations. It's the only platform under the United Nations that specifically has the mandate to discuss transboundary water cooperation as a convention. And it's open to all interested countries, as I said, 55 parties, but more than 130 countries are exchanging experience. And at the moment, we are preparing for our meeting of the parties, which is essentially the same as the COP, as you would call it for, say, the Convention on Biological Diversity or the UNFCCC, which is next week. We will have the governments of India and Bangladesh represented, I believe, as delegates at that meeting. And we have over 100 countries represented and over 500 participants from all over the world who will be coming to talk about transboundary water cooperation and to share their experiences, to share their challenges, and to talk about particular technical topics that are of particular interest to them, including preservation of ecosystems and biodiversity, which I know is a very focused topic for you as part of this conference. So under the Water Convention's program of work, we have this triennial, every 3-year program of work. And it includes topics that are very familiar, but also very challenging for countries and stakeholders to work on transboundary cooperation. So there's monitoring and assessment, also the climate change adaptation aspect of water, financing transboundary cooperation, which is a very big one because we often see that river basin organizations and river basin projects and basin projects generally are quite hard to finance at times on a regular basis, apart from project funding. We also have an area on the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus. As I said, I look after the area on transboundary water allocation, but that is to say that we have this guiding material on the 3-year program of the Water Convention, which will be up for renewal at the next week at the meeting of the parties. And I'm very happy to say that there is a new sub-program area, 3.6, on conservation and restoration of transboundary freshwater quality and inland water ecosystems. So this is a new program area that will be in place for the next 3 years. And I believe, given the focus of your conference, this would be a very opportune time for those in the room who are interested to engage in this program of work area, to share what is going on within the Ganges in terms of law, diplomacy, ecosystem preservation and restoration, and to share your experiences and also to join the meetings wherever you can, to ask for support and to exchange with others from around the world. So I think this is a very opportune and auspicious moment to be delivering this keynote, because we have next week the adoption of this new sub-program area, and I would welcome all of you to engage in that in the coming 3 years. So how does the Water Convention practically support peace via transboundary cooperation? As I said, it's this dynamic institutional framework. I know that Shawahik in the room has been to some of our meetings and has seen the kind of dynamism that comes from the Water Convention, bringing together countries, international organizations, UN agencies, academia, civil society, to talk about transboundary water cooperation and transboundary water management at different
we thank Remy Kinna sir for his keynote address, and we formally welcome all of you to this special panel on law, ecology, diplomacy, rethinking the governance of transboundary Ganges Basin. Now, this topic holds a particular significance for South Asia. As we all know, the Ganges River flows through multiple countries, and we are very fortunate to get a perspective from India, Bangladesh, and Nepal. We have the panelists who represent not only the voice of India, but the voice of Bangladesh and the voice of Nepal. These are the challenges that we've been dealing with, which particularly talks
Sorry about
about
that.
governance.
My laptop chose to freeze. So let me just bring up my PowerPoint again, and I'll share my screen and finish off my presentation. Yes, so just to wrap up, as I said, the Water Convention has particular practical ways that we can support hydro diplomacy and transboundary water cooperation in terms of political and technical challenges, and also supporting policy processes and technical cooperation from national to basin and global levels. I won't go into detail on this other than to say that we have some practical materials to help countries and partners strengthen agreements. And we have examples that we've worked on in different parts of the world to help countries with their transboundary cooperation agreements. We have an implementation committee that looks at matters of interpretation of international water law, and I encourage you to look into that. And then just for my concluding remarks, as I said, the aim of hydro diplomacy is to establish this kind of continuous and sustainable cooperation on the basis of transparency and predictability. A basin agreement is a means of demonstrating that hydro diplomacy in terms of the players involved and the objectives pursued. And the Water Convention provides a relevant political and technical framework and tools to support states, to support civil society, academia in your work on technical issues that are important to you, and in particular in the framework of what we're talking about, law, hydro diplomacy, and ecosystems in the Ganges system. And I welcome your engagement in the future Program of Work Area 3.6, and more generally in the Water Convention's work. With that, I thank you very much for your time, and I wish you a very good rest of the conference.
Although Remy cannot hear us, but thank you, Remy, for the inaugural address. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure hearing you. I think, yeah. So we have a recent discussion where we see that the AI would take our jobs and the technology has a lot to do with it. But I perhaps believe that's not true, because I feel technology lagging behind a bit. And thankfully, we have options to edit, to option to resend, perhaps on WhatsApp and other platforms. So probably the portion where I said something before could be edited as well. So now we'll take a fresh start and come back again. So I'm delighted to welcome you all for this special session on law, ecology, diplomacy, rethinking the governance of transboundary Ganges Basin. Now this topic holds a very particular significance for South Asia. We all know that the Ganges River flows through multiple countries, India, Bangladesh, Nepal. Represents not only just a crucial issue about governance, but about issues of environmental importance, economic lifelines. So therefore, today we are present here to discuss the challenges surrounding governance that are deeply interlinked with issues of national security, environmental degradation, and regional cooperation. VMLS is very fortunate to have three very distinct and yet very experienced people who will not only voice three different countries, but also give insights from their own perspectives. We have from India, Advocate Shawahik Siddiqui. We have from Bangladesh, Justice Masroor, and from Nepal, Dr. Deepak Gayawali. To begin with, I wish to introduce Dr. Deepak Gayawali. Dr. Gayawali is a hydroelectric power engineer, Moscow Energy Institute, and a political economist, UC Berkeley. He is an academician at the Nepal Academy of Science and Technology and the former chair of Nepal Water Conservation Foundation. He was Nepal's Minister of Water Resources in 2002 and 2003. and has been an advisory board member of STEP's Center IDS Sussex, Stockholm World Water Week, UN World Water Assessment Program, as well as the US Pacific National Northwest Lab's multi-country study on human choice and climate change. In 2006, he chaired a multi-expert team that reviewed the EU's global water research. He was also a member of an independent external evaluation arrangement for UNESCO and the Dutch government 2007, which reviewed institutional arrangements for UNESCO IHE Institute of Water Education at Delft. Till recently, he co-chaired Climate Action Network South Asia. His research focuses on interface between society and resources, mostly water and energy, which he examines from the perspective of critical theory. Welcome, Dr. Deepak Kayavali. Next, we have with us another jewel in this session, that is Dr. Masroor Salikin. Dr. Salikin has over 17 years of experience as a judge, researcher, teacher, and a legal practitioner. He completed his PhD in law from University of Galway, Ireland, where his research topics include environmental justice, judicial proactivism, separation of power, and collaborative constitutionalism. He also holds an LLM in international law and development from University of Nottingham, which he earned as a Chevening Scholar. Dr. Salikin is currently Additional District and Sessions Judge in Bangladesh Judiciary. Welcome, sir. Next, we have the architect, the mind, and the source of inspiration of this panel discussion, who not only helped the team at VMLS to curate the program structure, but also guided me in my PhD, which happens to be on water corporation, and yes, we have a common surname. So any guesses? Yes, it is Advocate Shawahik Siddiqui, sir. We also happen to be alumni of the same institution, which I just came to know early morning that is Aligarh Muslim University. So Advocate Shawahik Siddiqui is a practicing environmental lawyer, arguing variety of cases before the NGT and the Supreme Court, and he has drafted nearly half a dozen of state water policies and forest laws and 2 notifications for the Government of India. He is also a faculty to the Central Water Commission for the training of CWES senior officials. So I think we are all set. Let us begin the panel. So before we actually delve into the depth of the issue, there is one common question which I personally have and I wish to ask to all of us, is the fact that considering our own respective countries' perspective, how do we assess the current state of law as far as ecological health, diplomatic engagement surrounding the Ganges Basin is concerned? And what are the trends and developments that are most concerning or rather promising in this space? Open to you.
Okay, you can hear me? Yeah. If you look at the current state of environmental law, I am extremely cynical, shall I say. Why? Because we have a new religion in our midst. It's called the religion of development. Forget the fact that it's mostly bad development, maldevelopment as I call it. But if you are against development, you will be marginalized in about 10 seconds flat politically. So environmental laws, environmental impact assessment, guidelines, everything have actually been done. In Nepal's case, it's obvious. India is a bigger country, and I don't know why in India it's so. It's a mystery to me. But in Nepal's case, and I'm sure it's the same in Bangladesh, much of this has been drafted under what we call international donor pressure. Okay? And it really does not have a life rooted in the national polity, so to speak. So as a result, it becomes mostly a formality. You know, the biggest scandal in Nepal right now recently is an airport that they want to build in the south of Nepal called Nijgarh Airport. It's going to clear out a huge area of our forest, you know, and all that for that. But the first question asked is, you know, why is it 8 times bigger than Heathrow Airport in London? Who needs that in Nepal? Well, it turns out the environmental impact assessment of that big airport, 8 times bigger than Heathrow in London, it was copy-pasted from a previous study on a hydroelectric plant called Arun 3 and the Nijgarh Airport in environmental impact assessment in places had not even bothered to remove that Arun 3 from the text, you know. So you could see that, you know, much of this is done just to please the donors or the funding agencies and doesn't have a life there, which is why I think this is a serious problem, because environment is a serious concern. It's our future. It's our present. But sadly, I think we've really missed on actually trying to indigenize our governance for a healthy environment. I think I'll stop with that.
Thank you. I think it's very easy for me to just replicate what he said. Like, I mean, Nepal case and Bangladesh's case is almost same. I must say, like, this is not the situation of Bangladesh and Nepal only. Unfortunately, this is the situation all over the world, unfortunately, because most of the countries, so I say like 10 seconds, I would say 1 second. If I say like I'm against development, they will just flat me down like in 1 second maybe. Like the same problem we have, like because India and Bangladesh, we all both share Sundarbans. And Bangladesh has been trying to build the Rampal power plant project in between Sundarbans. There was massive protest against that. There was like, I mean, one writ petition filed in the High Court Division. Interestingly, the High Court Division, I being a judge, I must say, like generally our Supreme Court is very proactive in environmental issues. Like whenever any case goes there, they are very much ready to give the relief. In the Rampal case, they refused the writ by saying that this is a very proactive one and there is no faith of that. And it happens always, like I mean, whenever there is a big development project by the government taken, the court, the system, the policymakers, the politicians, everyone is in favor of that. So unfortunately, laws, regulations, whatever we have, those are impractical and are not being implemented in the field level, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, my co-panelist. You really helped me to reflect a bit differently. So as a practitioner of law, I have always been promoting rule of law, so to say. And from that perspective, I would like to reflect on two sorts of baselines. Now, when in the context of rivers, when you try to look at the state of law, ecology, and sustainability or economy, what you get to notice in the Ganga basin is that there is a lot which is happening and there's a lot which has happened, and it's all not on the right note. From the transboundary basin perspective, there is almost a deadlock. There's nearly nothing which has happened in the last 15-20 years which should have happened. Even despite the half mandate which we have surviving in the form of treaties and agreements, and the institutional mechanism, the quasi-institutional mechanism in the form of joint meetings that we have. With Nepal, it's a deadlock. The mutuality has got a setback in a big way. Anything which has happened was 2 years back, a small meeting on navigation, which did not see the light of the day, and with VEX and WAPCOs just discussing the potential DPR, it just ended there. In terms of, again, transboundary, India-Bangladesh, if you want to look at the baseline, there has been an overwhelming overconfidence on the mutuality and the future that both countries attempted to see. And that investment has not gone the right way as we have seen. So that's the transboundary kind of a baseline. If you want to look at within the country perspective, from the formal planning and the policy instruments, what you infer is that each country has set a larger ambitious agenda to develop water resources as much as they can. So the Q6 and megawatts interaction is very high. The number, the power, the hydropower that India can produce is projected to the tune of zillions of megawatts, is one is to put it that way. Nepal is again projecting its power potential to be very ambitious under different projects. How much of them will see the light of the day is a different matter. Bangladesh is again projecting the navigation, the economic corridor and multimodal transport connected to river navigation and water cooperation in a big way. So each country is competing against another, is still trying to come together to weave an agenda which is misplaced completely because you have not done the right kind of arrangements, which have not seen the light of the day, which have not translated so far, and is still there is this misplaced overconfidence that they will somehow be translated. So the state of affairs, if you want to examine from the baseline perspective, is completely messy. Each country is attempting to compete and still does not have the framework to achieve what it wants to achieve. So I think I will stop here and try and follow the next line of questions.
So let us go deeper into the topic of the discussion, and I think I have a follow-up question for you, Mr. Shavaik. So, what role do you feel that the Ganges River has played in the domestic and international water policies as far as India is considered?
Oh, that probably requires another day. But so to say, so domestically speaking, it is the epicenter of all the narrative that one could imagine in within India. Whether it is the current narrative of religious sentiments tied to the river, the narrative being also tied to ecology, for example. We have seen new concepts coming in. We don't talk, the environmental flows anymore. We now talk Aviral Dhara. We're not talking, quality of standards of water based on ISI standards or BSI standards, whatever you want to call it. Now we are talking Nirmal Dhara. So these are all vague concepts which have come into formal planning and policy. And Ganga has become somehow not only the political narrative, but a developmental narrative, a futuristic narrative, and a tool for a larger good that government of the day wants to see. In terms of power development, ecology, food security, I think Ganga has shaped a lot more, so to say, the policy narrative in the country. We have had a Ganga notification. Almost all the mini constitution and environment that you want to look at in India under the Environment Protection Act of 1986, starting from 74 Water Act up till the latest Ganga notification 2016. I think Ganga has shaped all of it, and it shapes the polity between Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Haryana, Rajasthan, and West Bengal, and that's population-wise more than half of the country. So it has played an immense role in shaping the policy, polity, the narrative, and the developmental basis, so to say, for the country. From a more bilateral, transboundary perspective, I think it has again been the focal point of the cooperation between at least three prominent neighbors, the upper riparian Nepal, the mid riparian India, and the lower riparian Bangladesh. And the last 60, 70 odd years have been around Ganga. And it would be not wrong to say that all the treaties of friendship and cooperation between the three countries have to navigate through the water treaties. So water is very intricately linked to what India sees Nepal's role, and what Nepal sees what India has to offer, and what Bangladesh sees as India has to offer, and how India perceives Bangladesh currently as in future. So I think Ganga has been at the epicenter of everything that you can imagine in the Ganga basin from a bilateral and the national perspective.
Thank you, Advocate Shavaik. There's a question now, considering with the line of thought that you've raised. So there's a question for Dr. Masroor, and I wish to ask, how have the ecological and water sharing concerns shaped Bangladesh's negotiations and diplomatic relationships as far as Ganges is considered?
I would echo again, Advocate Shavaik, Ganges and which is known as Padma in Bangladesh, the part in Bangladesh, this has been one of the top in the election manifesto for all the parties. We will take water from India. Let's bring water. So in the recent flood, there was a flood in several districts in Bangladesh, I would say last month. So there were few social media posts written by few young enthusiast people. They were saying that let us start building a dam in front of Farakka. Then when India will open Farakka, we will close that. And then the water will go back. So I thought that this is very, very innovative idea. So I'm not a scientist. I would say if someone who is a scientist or engineer, they might be able to say how that can be done. If we can, but people started even raising fund for that. I believe many of you know that recently the situation of Bangladesh has gone through few incidents and few changes, and the changes has impacted the relationship between the neighboring countries as well. Like Bangladesh and India, I would say very good friends. These days may not be. Like I must not say these things publicly, but like I believe these things all are in newspaper. Yeah, no worries. I know, like we can edit that. But like from the policy perspective, politicians, the diplomacy perspective, Ganges, Padma, these are very vital because water is something we cannot avoid this thing. Like whatever we have, we need that. Definitely, we need waters, and all the policies have been governing to us that. But every day we say the name of Mamata Banerjee, the CM of West Bengal, so many times every day because like she says one day like she's not going to give the water from Tista. So these things like very common in the newspapers every day, every morning when we open the newspaper, we see something regarding either Tista or Ganges or Padma. So these are issues like which are not only used by the politicians, these are also even used by the newspaper, the journalists, the lawyers. Unfortunately, we don't have a water lawyer in our country, like Mr. Savaik. Like I was mentioning to him in the early morning that we have environmental lawyers, but unfortunately, we don't see any cases being filed in the court asking or seeking relief regarding water issues in the courts. I hope that someone like Mr. Savaik will be in Bangladesh as well, who will be able to file, if needed, a case in the international tribunal maybe, seeking, because when the policymakers, the politicians have failed, it's up to the court now, I would say, like to give some relief or maybe justice. So then maybe the politicians will retire and the courts will be able to give some justice to the people regarding water.
I think this is very interesting to see a lawyer, a judge sitting on the same chair and perhaps, and now we'd like to call upon Dr. Deepak sir. What opportunities and challenges exist for Nepal in contributing to transboundary water governance and ecological conservation, according to you?
Okay, Nepal's position is very different, in several ways. It's not only is it an upper riparian, and once you're on upper riparian, maybe not in real practice, not in stated terms, but on stated terms, you all upstream countries hold the Harmon doctrine in their heart, if not in practice, which means absolute sovereignty over whatever we do. Okay, it's both a strength and a weakness at the same time. Strength that, let's say, for instance, the Ganges, until Nepal says yes, nothing will happen. But Nepal can't say yes because once you say yes, everything goes out of your hand, to other powers. Not just countries, India and Bangladesh, it goes to international financiers, it goes to everyone else. So there's a huge resistance in Nepal, naturally, and huge suspicion on any arrangement. So Nepal is far more critical than most others on this issue, first. Second is, from a Nepali perspective upstream, it's more than just being upstream. It's also that we were never a colony, okay? Strongly influenced by British Raj, but we are not formally a colony. The advantage of that has been that, for instance, you cannot go and argue in a Nepali court in English. We have English is not allowed. All our laws are in Nepali, have always been, and you have to argue in Nepali there before a judge, okay? Now, if you go back to 1944-45, it's a very strange document that I came across in Oxford. It's written by the Secretary of British India, Sir Olaf Carrow, okay? And it's very interesting that, there was the first time talk about developing, hydropower and building dams in Nepal, way back in 1944, okay? And what is interesting is the chief engineer of what was then United Provinces, now Uttar Pradesh, writing on that memo, saying that this is very interesting because without building dams in Nepal, we cannot supply dry season water to United Provinces, Uttar Pradesh, okay? So from a Nepali perspective, from British Bharat to Bharat, both are Bs and nothing has really changed. It's still a very colonial paradigm of resource extraction that's still at work. That's the first thing to realize. Second thing to realize is that there is no regionalism. There's only bilateralism. India does not believe in regionalism. I was a government civil servant in 1986, October. I still remember. I left after that. And I wrote the only trilateral meeting minutes between Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. It was my job. I had just come back from Berkeley. So they said, you write, okay? So what was interesting is nothing has happened, nothing has moved since then. And it's only bilateral. Now, bilateral has another problem here, you see, because there's contradiction between countries and there's contradiction within, let's say, India. Let me start with India. Bihar, it's all about flood control. Biharis are not interested in anything except flood control. Okay, they have too much water anyway, so they don't need the water. Uttar Pradesh is all about irrigation. They're not interested in other stuff. Delhi, and you go further that way, is only interested in water supply and hydropower. So you see there's contradiction within India about how to deal with Nepal and Nepali projects. That's the first one. Now between Bangladesh, India and Nepal, you see another set of contradiction. Bangladesh's main interest is flood control and maybe augmented dry season flow. India's concern, I told you, is already three contradictions there. Okay, and Nepal's, unfortunately, is hydropower only. When you mentioned the Navigation Act, 2015, I think India passed, Modi's government, I think for 16 or whatever. Frankly, I as an environmentalist see that as very positive. Okay, it's not moving anywhere, it won't move anywhere because the formal dominant paradigm in India is irrigation, as far as the Ganges is concerned, Ganga, and it is about not a drop of water wasted to the sea. I've heard this from too many official Indian in pronouncements, which means that, you can't have navigation if you're not going to waste water to the sea. Okay, advantage as an environmentalist to me of navigation is that, one, you got to have water in the river. That's the biggest thing. You can't have navigation otherwise. And that goes completely against the current policy of not a drop wasted to the sea. The second is it requires an alliance, a political alliance that does not exist. The political alliance has to be between environmentalists who want to see water and clean water in the river. I mean, you can't have a sewer and run your ships there. It has to be relatively clean, and it has to be sufficient so that the barges don't sink, on a sandbar. The second major factor there has to be that the business community has to realize that transport on an inland river is 1,000, mark my word, 1,000 times on energy and rupees term cheaper than transport by trucks. No region in the world has developed as an economic superpower without developing inland transport. Mississippi is navigable from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. Rhine is navigable from Switzerland all the way to Holland. Volga is navigable from the Black Sea all the way to St. Petersburg, and so on. China did not have inland navigation till 1986, practically nothing. Okay? Now they have overtaken the United States in inland navigation. Why? Because it's the cheapest form of transport. So if you have a business community and an environmental community that comes together to have water in the river and to have inland navigation, you might move forward in a new direction, but it is not happening. There is the South Asian environmental community is dead on this matter, and South Asian business community knows that they have a captive market and they can always push the extra cost on the consumer. So there is really no incentive to bring down costs. Okay? So this is where the contradiction has to be handled at that larger level. And frankly, in the 21st century, as I was telling Sawik and I think Eklavya, environmental and social activism was very good in the 1980s and 1990s. 21st century, it is dead in South Asia and practically dead in the global north. So unless this gets revived again through activism, I really am extremely pessimistic that anything will move forward. I'll stop with that.
My home state, Uttar Pradesh, has been always demanding. So this brings us to round two of the discussion, where we will focus more on the reflections from round one, that is on the existing water cooperation agreements. So I have a question for you, Advocate Shivahik. In light of the reflections from round one, how do you evaluate the health of existing legal frameworks, water sharing agreements that govern Ganges Basin? And what are the critical gaps in the implementation, enforcement, and political willingness that are hindering water cooperation in South Asia?
I think I part answered it in the beginning that they are obsolete in any case. But as an addendum to what Deepak Gyawali said, and an interesting one, navigation appears to be an entry point, and let me take that entry point to illustrate what is the status of the water cooperation agreements in the Ganga basin. So 5 of them exist. So Ganga has also been responsible for at least delivering 5 so-called water agreements or treaties in the entire basin. So that includes 3 with Nepal and 2 with Bangladesh. Usually we only talk of one with Bangladesh, which is the Ganges or Ganga Treaty of 1996, but there are 2. So there is also a framework agreement, which in fact is much more promising than the treaty itself. In terms of what we have with Nepal, you see we have got Kosi agreement. Half of the agreement out of 16 clauses, 9 are dead. Why? Because it is about how would you construct the barrage. The agreement itself is about the barrage, and you know how would it be constructed, whether you will carry man and donkeys and labor and wood and pebbles and stones from which point to which point, and who will do what, and how can you procure, and what would be the royalty for His Majesty, etc., etc. So half of them are dead, and half the clauses that survive are contested. There is literally no dispute settlement mechanism. It is at the wish and whim of the political masters. There are half-hearted arbitration clauses which are left in limbo, because if one country does not initiate, there is literally nothing that the other country can do. So a scheme of Kosi is followed in Gandak, and Mahakali becomes a bit different. Mahakali is sort of a smart exercise where you club existing project into a future one. Existing ones are subassume or meet fait accompli, and the future is never realized. So Mahakali is a smart deal where the Tanakpur and the Sarda is subsumed into a futuristic treaty, and Panchvesham multi-purpose project is being projected as the new one, which never happened and seems to not happen because the DPR is pending for the last 20 days. So the state of agreements and treaties as far as India-Nepal is concerned is quite concerning. It's not on the right track at all, and it has not delivered, in fact, what it had promised. So ostensible benefits of irrigation, benefits of navigation, the benefits of, for example, power development from the Panchmeshwar project, irrigation from the Gandak, and flood control from Kosi barrage have not been realized, because in Kosi agreement, there is no mechanism. It is a flood control agreement without having a flood control mechanism in place. There is an overconfidence on embankments that once built will never be breached. So once you build a barrage, it's not postulated what happens if a bigger flood comes, what is the SOP, what is the standard operating procedure. If a flood occurs, what the officials and mechanism is supposed to do, how is it supposed to respond. Once you build a barrage, the agreement ends there. There is simply no, scoping of what will happen in future. Similarly with the Gandak and similarly with the other. And then there is, after 50 years of existence and working of those agreements and those projects and barrages, there is simply no assessment of what has been achieved in view of what was promised to be delivered. So whether irrigation potential has been achieved and realized, whether some kind of positive environmental impact of projects has happened, or they've resulted in negative impact assessment, there is a permanent flood in Bihar out of those projects, downstream, and in certain areas in Nepal as well. So Government of India keeps compensating certain villages that are trapped within embankments built by Government of India within the projects areas. So state of affairs between India and Nepal in terms of the health of treaties is quite concerning. When you come to Ganga Treaty, quite briefly, it's a underutilized aspirational treaty whose critical clauses that were supposed to address the core issue have never been realized. So issue of augmentation of flows has never been realized. The issue of basin development has never been touched upon and realized. There is Article 9 in the Ganga Treaty between India and Bangladesh that says that both countries shall try to conclude, I am emphasizing the words written as such, conclude treaties and agreements on all the 54 rivers. Look at the intent of the treaty in 1996 and look at what has happened 2019-22. what India has done two MOUs, one on the Feni River, another on the Kushiara River. From Feni, India is drawing 1.82 cusecs of water through MOU with no mechanism in place for dispute settlement and grievance. And from Kushiara, both countries are drawing water for their respective needs. Idea was to conclude basing agreements. We have eroded the spirit of the treaty and gone for MOUs that stand without any supporting mechanisms. So I would say that by and large, in Ganga Basin, Nepal, India, Bangladesh have not really benefited from the advancements in international water law. There's a lot which can be incorporated. We have our own sort of legal concepts to be applied. So concepts of no harm, concepts of equitable utilization, etc. have been customized, so to say, both in Mahakali in 96 and Ganga. But then there is further no mechanism that how that no harm will be prevented. There is no mechanism to say what does equal and equitable utilization would be translated into practice. So I think there is a lot that needs to be looked at, lot that needs to be understood in terms of how do we improvise, modernize our treaties. And the last bit which Dr. Gayawali has touched upon, the navigation as an entry point. Now you see in all the agreements that you will see in the Ganga Basin, there is a clause that talks about navigational lock and navigational benefits, starting from Kosi. It comes with a caveat and a rider. It says that subject to the technical feasibility. So His Majesty has all the navigational rights down the Kosi Barrage, subject to the technical feasibility determined by the Chief Engineer of the Kosi Barrage itself. Same clause exists for the Gandak Basin and same clause for the, for the Ganga Treaty, that there is no talk of navigation in the Ganga Treaty, but in the other agreement of 1972, there are navigational protocols between India and Bangladesh. So the state of treaties between all the riparians is really a concerning area, and there is a need for revisiting and modernizing these treaties on the current challenges of climate change and resilience that one needs to look at.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Advocate Shapaik, sir. So I think there's one follow-up question. This is a common question for both Dr. Deepak and Dr. Masroor. So we've been studying about carrying capacity of rivers and water, perhaps. So I believe, there's one question that I have with the given climatic changes and a lot of talk happening on climate change. How do we see the broader regional water, management agreements, and how could they be more futuristic in their approach when we talk about issues like carrying capacity and climate change per se? Over to you.
Thank you. So what has been discussed, the treaty we have between India and Bangladesh, like in 1996, unfortunately, after 1 year, we had the Kyoto Protocol. And the world was well aware of the climatic changes from 1992 because we had the UNFCCC in 1992. The Ganges Treaty said that, the water sharing will be between 1st Jan to 31st of May. What about the rest of the year? So the rest of the year, we will be just looking at the sky and waiting for something to happen. So it didn't get into the mind of the policymakers or the politicians who attended the treaty signing agreement or like this discussions and negotiations that climatic changes are happening and we cannot avoid that the climate has been changed. We have seen rain in the last 5 days, maybe in Chennai as well. So this is not the year of the time of the year that when so much rain should have happened generally, naturally. So we have seen in the Ganges Treaty this only 5-6 months, the monsoon periods have been covered. So there is no mention about those other terms. And as we have been mentioning, the no harm principle. This no harm principle is a legal principle. But unfortunately, how to implement that? If we don't have any institution, if we don't have any structure to, implement that. So having a principle is of no meaning. And on another very, problematic part of the Ganges Treaty is that, there is no mention of this transboundary ecosystem management. So this is very, very pertinent, not only these days, this has been pertinent issue for I would say, for ages. So without having these important things like climate change should have been considered, these ecosystem issues should have been considered, and this no harm principle, how to implement that. And when we were listening to the online presentation, there is a lot mentioned about this United Nations Water Course Convention. But how many parties have really ratified that? None of the South Asian countries, I would say, have ratified the convention or even a party to the convention. So having a convention of that type, and we are not inclined to sign or ratify that, even if we have ratified that treaty, what would happen? I generally give the example to my students, like Bangladesh is a signatory to CTBT, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, whereas USA is not a signatory to CTBT. So how many atomic bombs Bangladesh has, you know? 0. But we are a party to the CTBT. So this shows, like, I mean, how we are influenced by the donor agencies, by the Western worlds, that you have to sign that, you have to ratify that. So now we have this Water Across Convention, which also does not have any secretariat. So even if we are a party to the International Water Across Convention, I would say, like, nothing is going to change. So we need to revisit the treaties. We need to send people who has knowledge regarding water. So recently we have seen that, I mean, the Uttarakhand High Court has given the rivers the legal capacity. Following that, the Bangladesh Supreme Court has also given legal personality to river Turag. Interestingly, the Uttarakhand High Court's decision was overturned by the Indian Supreme Court. State. Also overturned in a sense. And Bangladesh Supreme Court has upheld the decision given by the High Court Division. So now, Turag, which is coming from India, Indian part has not got like this legal personality status, but the Bangladesh part has got. And before giving the decision, I was once talking to one of the leading water experts in our country, Mr. Ainun Nishad. He's a water scientist. He was saying to me, he was not even consulted. Because, like, me as a lawyer, I just see river as a river. But when a water scientist see a river, he sees river from different angle. Like we were seeing the presentation in the morning, like for the first time I came to know that river has 3 ages, the young age, middle age, and old age. This is the first time I'm listening to these things, because this is how a water scientist would see these things. But when the court are giving the judgments, like what we are doing these days, we are just making laws which has no implementation capacity, without any infrastructural capacity to implement those. So we need to revisit, but revisit with the intention to implement things, like having a treaty, having treaties, bilateral, multilateral, regional, whatever you say. Nothing is going to help, nothing is going to work, unless and otherwise we are doing those things with political willingness to really resolve the issues. Thank you.
No, this is a very touchy subject you've raised, okay? And let me give a few instances, okay, to tell you where the legal and formal discourse is and where the reality on the ground is, okay? And I'm going to tell you a story which is, frankly, I'm going to say off the record. You can listen to it, keep it in mind, discuss it, but don't ever write about it, okay? I was Minister for Water, and then, it turns out, I found out, it's not true, Nepal actually voted in the UN for that thing. Now, how I found out was that Nepal voted, and I'll tell you how it voted, for, the only country in South Asia to do so. But Nepal, unless they have done something recently, which I don't know, the last I know is they have not sent a formal written letter yet. You have to send a formal letter after that, And the guys from the UN, they keep coming to Nepal every year to say, get the letter. And then you know what happens? All the senior officials of the ministries go either on leave or they go on field trip or something like that. So I was minister, and then suddenly everybody is out there getting my approval to senior most guys have to be approved, no? So what's going on, Says, sir, this is the story. So they told me the story. Now what had happened, how Nepal voted, is, again, I don't know how bad it is with Bangladesh, but Nepal is terrible. Trip to the UN means the Prime Minister in power takes a whole lot of flunkies along for a free trip to the United States. So guys go there as part of a huge delegation, and first day they attend with all the badge and all that, second maybe, and then for the next 3 weeks they all disappear because somebody's got a son studying somewhere, another one has a nephew in another place, and someone wants to go to Disneyland and all, okay? So nobody was there. So the voting was going on, and again what they do is they bring in Nepalis who live in the US, Nepali citizens, as members, because you don't have to pay for airfare or hotel at all, no, it's quite cheap. And then you get political favors, So there was this joker, he's a lawyer, I can give you the name later, but I won't do it now publicly. So this guy happened to be in New York, he didn't have to go anywhere, he was formerly a member of the delegation. He walks in at the time and hears that there is this voting going on for this water this thing course. He came for Nepal, he's the only one there from Nepal sitting there. And then he says, oh, water, it's very important for Nepal. Bang, yes, he voted. Everybody was aghast because that was not the Nepali position. Which is why everybody goes on leave every time the UN guys come and say, give us the letter. So the letter was not given. Anyway, this is off the record, okay? Don't ever mention this, okay? And now let me go back to this whole issue of environment, the bigger issues you raised about climate change. Problem is, this is such a serious issue on the one side, and on the other hand, it is so cavalierly treated unseriously at the official level, okay? I keep arguing that COP, we're going to have another COP soon, I think, it's nothing but climate tourism. Guys go there, have a good trip. The one in Egypt, I think, our minister was missing because half the delegation had gone to see the pyramids. Okay. So, it's really ridiculous. Now, let me talk about e-flow and something else, and I'll close with that. Now, e-flows are there. We all as environmentalists say that's great. I was on some of the hydropower station thing in the remote areas I was going around. I noticed that in the dry season, they're not leaving any water in the river. They should leave 10%. I talked to them. First, they hemmed and hawed. Then finally, they said, sir, e-flow is a government regulation. Yeah, we should send 10%. But the power agreement we have done with the national utility is also a government regulation. If we don't give that minimum power, it's seen immediately in Kathmandu at the head dispatcher, and they will fine us instantly. Nobody comes to look at e-flows, so if they do come, we'll pay the fine. Yeah. So much for e-flows. I talk about another important flow, at least on the Ganga, because Ganga, like the Mekong, somebody was in the morning talking about it, these are civilizational rivers. Okay? It's very important. Now, what has happened, I'll give you an example from India and from Nepal, is I talk these days about what I call S flows, spiritual flows. People have to be cremated on that river and all, there has to be water. So this is a very powerful motivating force. Now, it's very badly addressed. So in India's case, I found out, and you may have better knowledge than me, I found out that when Kumbh Mela was taking place, now when 100 million people are trying to take a bath in Allahabad, you got to have water there. It turns out Government of India quietly emptied the Tehri reservoir just to make sure that there was water down there. I thought it was only India that did that. I found out in Nepal, there are 9 days in Kathmandu Valley, Shivratri being one, Ram Navami being another. Well, huge amount of people come to the Bagmati river to take a holy bath. Apparently, our water supply from this massive project called Melamchi project, the water is diverted from drinking water to pump into the Bagmati simply because the water needs to be there. And so many people come to bathe. Again, done very quietly. No formality, nothing you won't find anywhere, but it's done. Okay. So I'm arguing here that issues are so big, climate change issues. Climate change, I was arguing this morning with somebody, that climate change is real, it's happening. But one thing about climate change is, and I'll be giving a talk on the 28th, it might be a web link, I'll send it to you guys if you're interested, at the International Water Association's Kathmandu sort of meeting. I'm talking about how the water community has completely failed in addressing climate change. We are just blindly following the energy community, mitigation, adaptation. Well, you can't mitigate water, there's nothing to mitigate in water. But adaptation also is meaningless, because as an engineer, I'll tell you, adaptation means, there's something terrible going to happen, so we adapt to that, okay? Now, climate change is telling you that future is not going to be like the past. Theoretically, that means, philosophically, that all the water engineering design that we do as engineers, how to design dams and gates and all, we do it by taking past data, which is very bad in our part of the world, okay, and doing regression analysis till we are blue in the face, and then predicting a 5,000 year flood and designing for one appropriate one, whatever it is, Now, if climate change is saying that future is not going to be like the past, what basis for that analysis? It's gone out of the window. So we have not really, as water people, really seriously come to terms with what water is and how the water crises that we are all going to face in the days ahead as global warming picks up, desiccation picks up, forest fires and all sorts of pick up and all that, heat stress, heat islands, how are they going to be addressed? No, we have just not even begun thinking at the political level. Okay. And why is that? I again come back to this issue. Political, there's a Gyawali's theory, and I'll end with this, Gyawali's theory of politics, which is that politicians and political parties are incapable of listening to reason. They can only feel the heat. Who applies the heat? Social environmental activists. But, as I said, they're dead. They've been domesticated, to tame issues and tame agendas, So this is the tragedy we are facing. And the answer to your question is, we are facing a massive catastrophe in the future, but at a political level, nothing, zero.
I think I would like to subscribe to Gayawali's theory. Perhaps all of us would. Yeah, so this brings us to the last leg of our discussion. And of course, we start with pessimism and being critical, but we need to end on a more hopeful and a more solution-based note. So for that, let's turn our question towards the last leg. And I have a question for Advocate Shivahik sir. So, how can we at international legal framework level and cooperation mechanism level assist better in basin governance from the South Asian lens perspective? Yeah.
I think, as I said, that we need to be clear about the baseline, and the baseline is telling us loud and clear that we have not performed well. So in terms of, so one question that I am often asked in various forums, that if treaties and agreements have not performed, why at all have them? And the rebuttal or the counter question that I have always been able to position is that, is there any other way to transform political will into affirmative actions other than treaties and agreements? I don't think that civilizations know from the very first treaty that was signed between states of Tigris, and in the Arab world, the first war was fought on water. The word river comes from rivarian, which means rivalry. So the first treaty that was negotiated was about coming to terms in the form of a something which is binding, either in a spiritual religious way or in any other form. So treaties, agreements do matter. I do tend to agree that they are not the only means to improve things. There could be very good programs, campaigns, joint mechanisms. Social forestry or community forestry in Nepal is one of the finest examples what a basin could achieve without having a bilateral agreement. So Nepal actually does contribute to a lot of catchment management in the Ganga basin without having a treaty with India. And if you look at what Canada and US have agreed under the Columbia Treaty, is how does a downstream state benefit and pay to the upstream state for flood management. So I think there is this space which has been created by adversity into opportunity, which is created by climate change, which has been created by several multilateral agreements, be it on Convention on Biological Diversity, Aichi targets. Now we are talking nature-based solutions in a big way. And we are also talking adaptation in a big way. So the core idea is this, that there is an urgent need to revisit everything based on the missing environment impact assessment in a transboundary basin context. So as of now, we do not have the mandate to do impact assessment. I think each country has a notification. The idea is, from a regional perspective, I'm not suggesting at all that you do a bilateral transboundary impact assessment. What you do is you assess in your own territory what has been the impact of the current management. Once you come up with that, each one can look at what is the result, and then actors, maybe informal actors, civil society can come together to bring those reports on one platform and see what has happened in the upstream, what has happened in the downstream. We are not even suggesting that governments do that exercise, because we understand it is not possible and doable for governments to do impact assessment of their own mess. So they will not do it. Let's be very clear about it. But if it can be done even within the country, we will have a good starting point. And from there, probably we start to bring in and mainstream many good concepts that are gaining the traction. So adaptation is one. If navigation can help, health of the rivers, probably navigation can be pushed a lot more. We can have country-wise river regulation zones, which can take away the encroachments and all the built-up area which has happened in rivers. We also can do away with a lot of adverse hydropower development which is happening just for the sake of happening. For example, in Himachal, the Ganga, part of the Himachal in the Ganga basin, Sainj has developed 57 hydropower projects, few of them in the Great Himalayan National Park. I think probably there is a need for the civil society to come up in the entire basin, to come up in a much more louder way, to at least if not halt, then slow down these kind of rigorous hydropower development practices, because we are over emphasizing in a big way on hydropower, whereas the energy mix has changed within India. There is a lot more solar which is picked up, and hydropower may not be needed at the cost of something which cannot be reversed. So I think these are the entry points which going forward, engineers, politicians, lawyers and civil society need to come together and consider and contribute, maybe not at a much larger scale, but from within a basin at a micro scale. If this gets a traction, I think many more missions that at least in India we have more than 3 dozen missions operating on water alone, is starting from a national water mission to what we call village water committees. And similar is, after Nepal has been democratized, there's a lot more in terms of the documents and policy and institutional mechanism that we are seeing. And in Bangladesh, one cannot even count how much of it exists. I'm constantly involved in many more Meghna Basin programs and, other programs between India and Bangladesh, Youth for Meghna and water ecosystems and whatnot. So Bangladesh is one country which has put up a Delta Plan 2100. It is the only country which has put up planning on each and everything that you can think of. It has put planning on micro sectors such as Bangladesh, not only Delta Plan, but How Development Plan. How is a very small wetland ecosystem, depression system in Bangladesh. But none of it is transcending and translating cooperation beyond a particular area. Though there is a readiness, for example, Northeast India is desperate to interact with Northeast Bangladesh. They share ecosystem. So Simsang in Meghalaya's Garo Hill is desperate to talk to Someshwari downstream communities in Bangladesh. But that's not happening because we have a typical top-down hydro diplomacy coming in the way, and therefore there's a need to rethink institutional mechanism where hydro diplomacy is decentralized, democratized, and institutions interact. So I think there is many more spaces which one can look at, and it is now on the civil society to come forward and mainstream those concepts and spaces. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Advocate Shavaik, sir. So if I could also quickly, bring a positive, point here. So I was recently a part of a program at, which was a part of Namami Gange project. So we are developing an SOP for large gatherings near Riverine and Ganges River. And I was fortunate to say that there are baby steps taken in the right direction. And the community as a whole, the beneficiaries as a whole are coming forward, talking about issues which initially were never a part of mainstream talking. So I think well planned is half begun, if I could safely say. So this also brings me to the last question, and perhaps I'll take insights from Dr. Masroor and Dr. Deepak on the common question. The common question is, what areas, according to you, should the South Asian countries prioritize to enhance regional cooperation and ecological resilience? Or rather, I would say, where should the shift lie to address more legal reforms and regional diplomacy in the positive direction? Over to you.
Thank you. Again, as I'm a person from the court, so we all generally talk because the European community has a court, like the European Court for Human Rights. The African community has a court, there's a regional court. I think the South Asian countries are the only one where there is no regional court for either human rights or environmental rights. And me and Professor Gitanjali Gill, we were discussing, 2 years before when I had my PhD defense, why don't we try to have a regional environmental court? And in that case, we may follow the formula of NGT. I know NGT has many flaws, but I'm a very big advocate of NGT's formation, because where the judicial experts sits with the scientific experts. I know there are many flaws, like the scientific experts are not experts of everything. But if we can follow that format that, I mean, where in the same bench, judicial experts with legal expertise and scientific experts can sit together, because river or environment or climate, these are not laws. These are more of science. So you need to know deep down knowledge of science before coming to a decision in judiciary. So if we can have some sort of, because already Advocate Shabaik has said about treaties or laws or cooperation. So I would say, like, I mean, if we have a forum or an institution where this no harm principle, if that is breached, if we can have a sanction behind that, if we have a forum to initiate against, like, I mean, if Bangladesh can file a complaint against India, maybe we can have arbitration, we may have negotiations, we may have litigations, whatever format it can be. But the European Court of Human Rights has really been a success for the European countries, because when any person is being refused by the courts of Ireland or any European country, they can go before the European Court of Human Rights. So why don't then we have an environmental court for the region, like the South Asian region, because we share so many things, not only rivers, we share the ecology, the biodiversity, everything we share. So if we have some sort of forum, maybe this will help a lot in enforcing those treaties, those bilateral agreements, maybe, or any conventions we have. And one other thing, that the SARC, which was very active once upon a time, I'm not sure why that has died these days. Maybe we may also try to initiate something in between SARC to have this negotiation going on, to have some kind of regional forum, so that where we can all go and then, I mean, enforce treaties. Thank you.
I hope you told me that all of you didn't come prepared. Didn't seem so. Dr. Deepak, yes, please, over to you.
Yeah. Okay. First, the oldest water conflict resolution was actually here in South Asia, in Nepal, 2,500 years ago, or slightly more than that, by the great Buddha himself. If you read the Tripitaka, you see that there was a fight between his father's clan and his mother's clan in Kapilvastu and his mother's clan in Devdaha. It's just east, Devdaha is east of the town of Butwal in Nepal right now, where a small river flows through called Rohini. We did it 2 times. We have done a Padyatra over the last 20 years from Gorakhpur all the way there, 10 days walking. Amazing. I mean, the kind of things I learned about parts of Uttar Pradesh that, as somebody said this morning, I think, Eklavya, forget Delhi. Even Lucknow has no idea what's going on in that part of Uttar Pradesh. It's amazing when you walk, Gandhian style, Padyatra. And that's the river where Buddha mediated that conflict between his 2 clans, mother's and father's clan, okay? So, we have a long history of how these things are done, and especially on these marginalized rivers, as we call them. Now, on the positive side, the inland navigation we've already talked about, that's one possibility. So about a year and a half ago, I was invited by your India's waterman, Rajendra Singh, and gave a talk in his Ujjain, whatever he had done. It was on his website, but his website seems to have disappeared. Don't ask me why. And my article or my write-up is in a magazine called Spotlight Nepal. If you Google Spotlight Nepal, Deepak Gewali, you'll get it, where I talk about 7 colors of water. To address climate change, we have got to get into what I call uncomfortable knowledge. And the more uncomfortable, the better. We have to generate uncomfortable knowledge, because comfortable knowledge got us into the mess we are in right now. So 7 colors of water, we start out with the first one is white water. That is meteorology. That is, the water in the atmosphere, the clouds. Nobody talks about it. And that is the source of all river water ultimately, okay? And climate change is causing havoc with that water. And that's where we need to have common cooperation. River cooperation, to my mind, is a win-lose situation. Any international river agreement means what you get, I don't get, and what I get, you don't get. So it's a win-lose proposition, good if it happens. But meteorology is a common problem for all of us. And the recent, the end September massive flooding in from Jaipur all the way, Rajasthan all the way to Nepal, should never have happened. Because the monsoon trough moved in a funny way and deposited all that, the rainfall. So that's where we could really cooperate, and because it's common concern for all of us. And somebody once said that, the cost of doing that, of putting up a weather satellite, SARC weather satellite, is less than the cost of one stupid fighter plane. Come on, we could do it, okay. So I would like to add here that another aspect is we are a semi-arid zone, all of us, except maybe parts of Meghalaya and Assam over there. But otherwise, we are a semi-arid zone where we have 4 months of flood and 8 months of drought. And I get really upset with people in Nepal, for instance, or even here, who keep saying we are rich in water resources. You cannot, average 4 months of flood and 8 months of drought and say we are rich. It's like putting one foot in a hot freezer and a hot stove and another in a refrigerator and saying on the average I'm comfortable. It's absolute nonsense. That's what we are doing these days, okay? So what we should do is these 7 colors of water: white water, brown, green water, which is soil moisture, nobody talks about it. All our forest, all our wildlife, all our dryland agriculture is dependent on green water, not on river blue water, And do we talk about it? It's so important. Similarly, brown water, groundwater. This is the largest storage in the world. Okay? We're not talking about it. And river water, blue water, of course, is there. But let me talk about black water. Very interesting, black water and grey water. Grey water is organic wasted water from your kitchen and all. It's easily recyclable. Black water, industrially polluted with heavy chemicals and pesticides or whatever you have, that's very difficult to clean. Too much energy required. Is there a solution? Conventional, this thing is not going to solve it, And we end up polluting our lakes and rivers and all by pumping black water into it, okay? I was at a 25th annual celebration in Bangalore of this NGO, research NGO called A-Tree, okay? Ashoka Trust or something, whatever. And what I heard there was amazing. It stuck to my mind even now, and I want to close with that, of uncomfortable knowledge and uncomfortable practice, okay? Or non-traditional practice. A young researcher, I believe her name was called Shreya Nath, if I'm not mistaken, they were doing research about precisely the highly polluted, toxic, industrial wastewater, tanneries and, all that, It's impossible to recycle, impossible to really clean because too much energy is required. What do they do with that? In our case, we just dump it into the river and pollute everything. What they did was they put it on a holding tank and then used it in tankers, put it in a tanker, and went and mixed that water with cement in highway building. Now see, highway building cement mixing does not have to be done with treated drinking water. Polluted water, you can use it, and that pollution gets locked up in cement for another 100 years without polluting, blue water and everything else. Now, my point is that, on the positive side, the more uncomfortable knowledge we generate, more non-traditional knowledge we generate, there's also traditional knowledge, but I'm talking modern, this is modern knowledge, okay? Then I think we really can solve water problems in South Asia much better. Right now, what we are doing is we are just holding on to the same old British legacy of bad engineering, let me tell you. I'm an engineer, and, we're using failed engineering to try to solve problems that are so complicated and indigenous to us. We need that new knowledge. And that knowledge does not have to always come from civil engineering. In fact, civil engineering is part of the problem. Okay? It has to come from sociology, anthropology, literature, lawyers, I don't know, from every other side, because water touches us all. Okay? And so other communities outside of civil engineering have not done a good job, to be frank about it. They have not put their minds sufficiently to forcibly generate this kind of uncomfortable knowledge. So I would suggest meteorology, inland navigation, and storage, different types of storage, not just dam storage. Dams only store water for downstream. They do nothing for upstream, okay? You have rainwater harvesting, you have wetlands preservation, you have groundwater storage, you have many types of storage that we should all be promoting, and that's where our well-being will lie. So I think that's the positive note that I can talk of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Deepak. I think we all can agree to one fact, and by that we can all end the panel discussion. Love thy neighbor. Thank you so much. It was a very great experience. I love the enthusiasm and the support. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. sure. I'll. Naveen, can you please help me?